Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. This is roundtable number 4. I'm joined today by wonderful guests. I'm honored to have both of them here. I have Hian, a long-time contributor of the community, and Mike from Resonant Arc, a true legend in the YouTube space. So I'm gonna leave space here for you to introduce yourselves to the audience, tell a little bit about what you do, just to give them an idea of who you are, even though, yeah, like you, Mike, I'm sure everybody knows, but anyways, if there's somebody who doesn't. All right.
Well, I guess first, yeah, Mike, I have a podcast on YouTube, and we mostly break down elements of good storytelling in video games, for the most part in RPGs, but we try to branch out a little bit here and there into other genres as well. And there's, I don't know, not much else to say other than I guess I was at one time maybe a little bit more popular in the Final Fantasy space of YouTube, and I've become less so in recent years.
Okay.
Sure. I'm Hian. I'm just a fellow traveler, I guess. I'm a freelance creator, write, compose, create digital art. Dabbled in game design for a while I lived in Japan. And as you said, I sometimes moonlight as a contributor for, I guess, certain people in the YouTube space and stuff like that. But not a very high-profile public persona, so bear that in mind. And I guess that's it.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, to give a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today, well, because of a certain game, I don't know if anybody knows, there's a certain RPG that has hit store shelves this week. It might not be that popular, but it definitely stemmed an impetus on my end to go back and talk about modern art's obsession with revisiting the past. So when I say revisiting the past, it means basically this creation of, or rather hyping of certain types of works in the mainstream now with remakes, remasters, reimaginings, and requels, which is what you see in the banner here in the podcast. So yeah, basically we're going to talk about these types of works today. Why is it that there is this trend of being so obsessed with the past recently? What may have started this trend? And our thoughts and feelings about it, and maybe how the trend is going to decline over time. Okay, so first things off, I would say that because of that certain RPG, which shall not be named, there has been some discourse that hasn't really reached a consensus, at least in the gaming sphere, about what exactly is a remake, what exactly is a remaster, what is a reimagining. There have been content creators coming out over the years trying to make sense of this. I don't want to sound like an old guy, but back in my day, I don't remember seeing this kind of confusion. But now it seems that it's not that solidified. So for the audience, given that some people may have different ideas of what these things mean, I want to first go through each one of us and have us explain a bit what our perspectives are on what is a remake, what is a remastered, and what is a reimagining. I'll skip requel for now because I think that one is very easy to at least understand a bit of what it's trying to be. But with these three in particular, there seems to not be a consensus. So I guess, Mike, do you want to go first?
Sure thing. I think if you had asked me this question 6 years ago, the answer probably would have been easier. I would have classified a remake as a game that is more or less recreated in very close to the same way, but within maybe a new game engine with totally rebuilt assets, sound and music and models and environments and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Totally rebuilt within a new game engine for a modern platform. Remaster, I would have called more or less a port that might include some quality of life updates or improvements to, gameplay or certain aspects, but for the most part, containing the original assets of the original game without modifying them or replacing them too much. That has become more confusing within the last few years, not only solely because of the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, but also because of Resident Evil remakes that, as far as I understand it, I haven't played them too much, can be fairly different as well. Not just, story beats, but also just the entire sort of way that you play the game, it being over the shoulder shooters rather than, fixed camera angles and tank controls like they used to be in their original form. So I think that sort of definition is being expanded to a large degree. So I don't know like how you would classify it today as much other than to say it seems that remaster now is pretty much the same as what I said before, but a remake can be something much more, it seems now, as far as what you can expect from a company who's saying they're remaking something much more than that. They can make wide deviations, add major portions to it that weren't there before, totally alter different parts of it. In fact, it seems like some people seem to kind of expect that now. Like, I would like to see them do almost another take on certain elements of this or whatever, which is what I would have considered something more of a reimagining before. But I don't know. It's all becoming blurry now, and I don't know what what to really think or do about that, because like, who defines these things really in the end? I mean, it's just a matter of like what projects these studios seem to be putting out, and what they are technically calling them, and I guess we just kind of have to sort it out amongst ourselves. But they seem to have a much wider definition now.
Okay. And you, Hian?
Well, so on one hand, obviously, we have whatever the industry says that they're doing, and we have colloquial usage and all that. But for the most part, my view is fairly similar to Mike's. So I would say that a remake is any work that is a recreation of an older work, largely from scratch using new materials and assets. I would say that a remaster is any old work that's re-released wherein materials or assets have been retouched to improve fidelity. In other words, upscaling, texture replacement, remastered sound, visual effects, additions, and so forth. and I would define a reimagining as any work that is recreated, but wherein constituent parts are changed so as not to be equivalent in meaning, purpose, context, or appearance to what they were in the original. And I'm known for being fairly pedantic about language, both in Mike's community and yours and elsewhere. And I think sometimes it's valuable to be pedantic about things like that because we have categorical terms for a reason, and that reason is for ease of sorting things. So that when I say, like when I say that I'm looking for a speed metal band, I don't want a person to come back to me with symphonic metal or new metal or what have you. I want them to come back to me with speed metal, and a term like that only has as much meaning as it does, pending the specificity that you're operating with. And when I think about the sort of etymology and lineage of the use of these terms, I'm usually thinking of this largely in terms of cinema and music, which has been doing this way longer than video games have. And remastering comes obviously from the idea in music of mastering, which is what you do when you have tracks, right, that you've recorded of instruments. And before you kind of put it all together and you render the final product, you go through this process known as mastering, where you're adjusting the sound levels of individual instruments to make it come together and have like a clean mix. And when we talk about remastering in music, we're talking about basically just messing around with those recorded tracks. You're not re-recording entire sections of strings or guitars or what have you. And when we're talking about remakes in cinema and music, then what we're talking about is literally filming new coverage or filming something entirely all over again from scratch, or recording new instruments and so forth. So I think it's appropriate that you kind of insist on that being applied as well to other types of media. Unfortunately, there's an incentive in the video game industry to not do this, because when it comes to video games, obviously there's an additional layer of complexity when it comes to assets, in the sense that if we're doing, like Mike says, using an old engine, for example, but replacing most of the textures and things like that, there is some element of creating certain things from scratch and putting it in there. And it's not necessarily clear exactly where the line goes. How much of the assets do you need to replace before it becomes less of a process of remastering as opposed to remaking? Or how much of the code do you have to replace? Having said that, this is something I talk about a lot as well. I feel like this is a sort of ship of Theseus type of deal, where it's basically just a question of how much of the old code base of a game, how much of the assets, how much of the designs are really remaining. And I feel like a lot of people are making this more complicated than it really needs to be, where it's fairly apparent at a glance that what you're looking at, like more than half of this thing has been replaced with new things that deviate massively from what the original is. And I sometimes feel as if people are being a bit purposely obtuse to that, because they're so attached to one label or the other. And the unfortunate sort of undercurrent of that has to do with production value and marketing, where if you're a video game company and you use the term remaster, like Mike said, there's some association to kind of ports and low effort and so forth. And on the other hand, if you've put a lot of money and time into recreating a lot of the assets, or putting it into a new engine or what have you, regardless of how faithful or how close it is to the DNA of the original title, in order to kind of put an emphasis on how much work how much money you've spent on it, it's a marketing strategy to be like, this is a remake, it's not a remaster, right? And so I think there are incentives in place, both on the end of consumers and on the end of sort of the publishing houses, to play a bit harsh, fast and loose with with the definitions here for things that don't really have a whole lot to do with the substance of why these terms were made in the first place. But fundamentally, I think it boons people to be a bit more strict with how they use their terms, because it makes it easier to have an overview over what kind of products that we're actually talking about and what the nature of those products are.
Okay, nice. Actually, now that you mentioned this, I remember when we were discussing briefly about Ocarina of Time 3D, actually, because I was also confused, like, what is the line that we should draw? Because you can see that the engine is relatively new, the assets were made from the ground up, so the experience kind of feels different, but the code is still, there's still a lot of code that is still the exact same as it was in 1998. So I remember you arguing that that in your view configures as a remaster, not a remake. And then I started to actually ponder a bit more about, like, where do we draw a line between remaster and remaking? And I've come to realize that maybe the reason why we have been having a bit more confusing. Oh, okay. Dude McGuy is saying that I have an echo coming through for me. Are you guys hearing an echo on my end?
I'm not hearing it.
No, it's a very weak one, if that's the case. Maybe some like a hint of audio lag, but no. Oh, now I heard my own voice, but yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll see what I can do. I'm gonna lower a little bit my volume and see if it makes a difference. Well,
it's not atrocious or anything like that, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't even hear it at all.
Let me know, dude, if it's better, okay? So what came to my mind, and I guess I can give my contribution to this question. I feel like it's actually interesting to look back into how these terms were used in other media before looking into video games. I think that Hian was in the perfect direction with music, because remastering seems to be something more structural and not necessarily change about the content itself, quote unquote. So, like, I would say the structural skeleton of, like, music or a film is usually preserved. Is usually the thing that is being changed, but the content of, like, the music itself, like the recording or the film scripts, those are things that are kept intact. And I feel like if you translate that to video games, I would say that maybe, like, the code is part of that quote unquote skeleton for the game to be presented in its proper form, because it's using the same logic and framework to provide that experience with the old mindset into new hardware. So I guess I would say then that remasters are something more along the lines of, like, visual, or in the case of video games, kind of like a translation of the old content to new hardware. But with remakes, it's definitely something more like the content itself is subject to change, but I feel like a lot of people have different ideas of how much something is changed to be considered a remake versus a reimagining. I think that you, Mike, your experience is a perfect example of this. I guess with Final Fantasy VII and Resident Evil, this is something that has brought attention to many. It's interesting when you look into, I don't know, like the history of these things in mainstream media, right? Because for remasters in audiovisual media specifically, they only started to become a thing when television came into the scene and they had to do rescans of films to update their visuals to a different kind of screen. So, and then this became something more culturally hyped by Disney with their animations. This is part of the reason, by the way, why I included Maleficent here in the banner, because I think a lot of this culture dates back to Disney's efforts in culture in more ways than one. But remakes almost always in the past have been, things that directors usually did to go back to works that they deemed to be imperfect or like unsatisfactory to them, I would say, and they try to do that from the ground up and try to apply it to standards. Reimagining, I am still not exactly sure where to draw the line on what is a reimagining or what is something completely, like it shouldn't even be called a reimagining. I would like to hear your guys' thoughts on this, actually. I wrote down here, I separated this definition into two types of categories, like reimaginings of story, which is basically the core narrative and theme are intact, but they are recontextualized by new locations and time periods. So, for example, you can imagine like if Final Fantasy VII was rewritten into like medieval Japan, like these things would have like the themes and the narrative. You might have beats that follow the exact same ideas, but the world being recontextualized is something that demands a lot of adaptation. I don't know how much you guys are familiar with Kurosawa's work and their reimaginings, like Seven Samurai. Everybody, I imagine, is familiar with that from Kurosawa. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with the Magnificent Seven, which is basically a Western take on Kurosawa's film, and it became one of the most celebrated Western classics of all time. So, and if you watch both movies, you realize that they are basically the same story. They're just reimagined in different contexts. Sorry. The second one, and this is what I want to hear from you guys, is reimagining of content, which is basically, I guess, what FF7 Remake is. It inherits names, it inherits designs, and other elements of the source material, while changing the core narrative, characters, and themes, thus changing the identity to the point that I don't know if it's exactly worth calling it Final Fantasy VII, for example. Do you guys think that there should be this kind of different types of reimaginings, or would you consider this type of reimagining just not even a reimagining, just something being mislabeled, quote unquote, as the thing that it's trying to, inherit things?
Well, I like your example of Seven Samurai and Magnificent Seven as a concept. Like that is the kind of thing that I would have thought of as being a reimagining of something. It's more or less the same core idea, but we're making a major switch in setting, time period, genre even, right? Mm-hmm. That to me makes a lot of sense. When it comes to the Final Fantasy VII remake, I don't know if I would call it a reimagining, because it's not. It's hard. It's hard on that one because there is so much of the content there that is lifted from the original game. This is why I think it's so divisive when people talk about this with that specific game. Mm-hmm. Like you have direct designs, enemy designs, boss fights, characters, all kinds of things, even story beats that are identical, right? They're exactly the same. But you're right in saying that the particular deviations from the original game squarely put this in more of a sequel category, and it's quite obvious that that's what they're doing with this. It is like some new part of the Final Fantasy VII compilation that is not trying to retell the story of the original game, but to add a new story within that sort of compilation of things that will somehow connect to the others in some way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know whether you call that a reimagining. I don't even think you do. I think you call it a sequel or a new piece of media within the franchise. Because it's yeah, like you're saying, it's sort of a different story with a new sort of thematic underpinning to it. It's not trying to delve into the same things as the original. It's trying to like add to that with a new well, I don't know. I don't know how best to put it other than to say it's clearly an added story or a sequel to this larger compilation. And you wouldn't ever call a sequel to something a reimagining. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I guess this is why I placed it here as well, like a requel. Like I guess this is a more new type of work that has become a bit more mainstream. I'm with you on that, like on the FF7 specific example. I also consider it as like a sequel to the compilation in a number of ways. It's just that personally, I can't really be sure what direction they're taking this, because they're not. I think that not even the artists themselves are really sure where they're going with this, because like even like yesterday, I think Hamaguchi came out and said that they would be looking into fan reactions to determine where they will take the story direction after this rather. I'm not going into spoilers here. I don't want to ruin anyone's experience if anybody's watching and wants to play Rebirth, but let's just say that the ending to this new game is something that is going to leave so many head scratching, and you kind of wonder if the artists know what they're doing. They could try to pretend that oh, this was kind of like it really is a reimagining in the weirdest sense possible, or they can just embrace it for what it is, that it's a sequel. Some people would disagree with us on that, but I feel like that's the case. So yeah, like I don't know. What about you, Hian? Do you agree with Mike on that? How do you see this?
I think I largely agree with Mike on most of that. I would say when I think of reimaginings, I guess one of the strongest examples that stand out to me is the I think late '90s Romeo and Juliet film with Leonardo DiCaprio, which is they they still speak in ye olde English, right, in Shakespearean, but it's set in modern Venice Beach, and everybody has guns and sort of the Hawaiian shirts, everything else. Um, but it's clearly Romeo and Juliet. It's telling the same story, but it's completely recontextualized when it's and shown off in a very different way, and um, it's a reimagining, and I think that that's one way of reimagining. But I suppose there are other ways to reimagine things, right? You can reimagine different things, and I can imagine an author. Let's say an author writes a story that has a very particular message or thesis to it, and the author, 10 years go by, 20 years go by, and the author kind of thinks some more about the topic that they wrote about, and maybe they've landed somewhere else later in life. They don't have the same opinion anymore about sort of life or what have you. and so they decide to kind of reimagine their own story, but it has a different theme, like characters arrive at a different conclusion or something along those lines. I would say that's a reimagining too, as long as the events, as long as it's still recognizably connected to what they were doing before. So again, it's a ship of Theseus kind of thing. If you like, you can think of it this way: every story is a reimagining of an older story, almost, right? Where we have these tropes, we have these characters, we have these recognizable plots and the hero's journey and everything else. Sort of Star Wars, A New Hope being an example of a reimagining of every other hero's journey that's ever been. But once you start changing locales, you start changing character names, you start changing the visual aesthetics to a certain degree, where it's no longer, it's not just the same as something else being done once more. You don't even start thinking of it as a reimagining. So obviously, a reimagining, just like sort of the modern use of the term remake, is in this kind of murky area of, or Ship of Theseus situation, where how much do you have to start tweaking things until it's no longer even a reimagining? It's just a new thing. It's just a new story. Or where does that line go? I don't think I really am in a position to kind of be stubborn about that and go, well, this is where the line goes and everybody else is wrong, obviously. I can't really do it. I don't think anyone can do that. But when it comes to something like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I was very tempted to call it a reimagining when it first came out, or a reboot or something along those lines. Obviously, not knowing where the story is going, but I don't know if I would call it a remake either, because even though it is showing off a lot of the same events, you could think of it kind of like if let's say the three of us wrote a story and then we released it, and then we decided to re-release that story 20 years later, but instead of just telling the story the way that it was told the first time, let's say it's told from the perspective of a character after the story is concluded and the character kind of dies and goes back in time. Obviously, if you did that, it would be technically it would be a kind of sequel, but in order to tell that sequel, you would also have to show all the events from the original story over again, right? Because it traveled back in time. So, would we call that a remake if we saw that if that was the story? Now, I'm not saying that that's the story of Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'm just saying that if you had a story like that, I don't know that you would call it a remake, because even though in order to tell that story, you have to recreate scenes from the original story because it's a time travel story. You don't call that like a remake. It's it's its own thing, and obviously I don't know what the explanation for some of these things are in the remake, because obviously there are sort of hints and even overt sort of dialogue and so forth that suggests that the events of the original game are either kind of like a known quantity in a kind of future vision-esque kind of way, or there's some time travel going on, who knows? And we don't know that, but obviously none of that was present in the original game. So insofar as that is true, there has to be like some kind of mechanical explanation for it in the lore of the remake, and whatever that explanation is, ultimately still recontextualizes the entire story, right? Because it's not just the story happening organically like in the original game. It's a story that's by some agent or narrative device within the remake. The story has already either happened or somebody's already aware of what's supposed to happen at one level or another. And I just think that it recontextualizes it sufficiently to the point that you kind of have to use some other term to describe it. And whether you want to call that like a requel or a reimagining of sorts, I don't know. But at the very least, it's not just a retelling of the story. I don't think that like description is open to you at that point when you're doing that.
Yeah.
All value judgments aside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely get behind that. I guess the best way you can look at this is the importance of a remake actually sticking to the source material in terms of like I guess narrative structure, core themes, and characters, right? Because um, this is a bit like what you look into, for example, the Disney remakes, the live action remakes. A lot of people go a bit back and forth on whether they're reimaginings or not. But technically speaking, like they're taking the source material, like the Disney film, not even like the fairy tale that it's based off of, but the cultural landmark that their films were, and they're using that as the skeleton to tell the same narrative beats but tweaking some little things here and there. uh, with Final Fantasy VII Remake, I guess you have familiar names and places, etc., and you might even find some familiar plot beats in certain aspects, but the context is so different that it's I guess the narrative structure is just not the same, and I think that makes a huge difference, right? Because if you're remaking something, the idea is that you're making something again, right? And not in a way like, oh, I am doing this thing called Final Fantasy VII again, and I do it the way whatever I want. No, making Final Fantasy VII or making like Cinderella, it's this means something, right? Like as you said, Hian, I think it's important to be pedantic about these things as well. Like when you say something like this, you're calling back to the identity of the thing that you're saying that you're making again, right? The idea
obviously
that you're making something again is to like either out of like an artistic, I guess. Pleasure in revisiting the work in a way that you can tweak a few things and make things clearer, or perfect something that you found as something like, oh, here's a plot hole, and then I'm trying to improve this part of the story. But you're still appealing to the thing that you're saying that you're remaking. I think it's completely different from what what Final Fantasy VII is doing, or what other quote unquote remakes are doing.
You see some sort of weird shenanigans on the internet occasionally, where people read the sort of dictionary, one of the dictionary definitions of a remake, which I think just says something along the lines of making something again or something like that, and then they'll use that to justify sort of remakes being wildly different or whatever. But the thing that strikes me as odd about that is because when it says to make something again, it doesn't. I guess it says to make something again or different or something like that. But to me, there's a point in which this exercise becomes absurd, because if I buy a piece of IKEA furniture and I build it, and it's supposed to be a chair or something, I take it apart again, and then I bring out my sort of electric drill, and I put all the pieces back together again, but now it's a scarecrow. I didn't remake the chair, right? This just because it's that's I don't want to. That's not making the chair again. I made a new thing by sticking the things together in a way that they weren't supposed to.
Yeah,
so
the analogy I was thinking of during a lot of this was, if I made a sandwich for my wife and she had asked for a cucumber sandwich, and I made it, but there was something off about it. Maybe I put mustard and she doesn't like mustard. Can you make that again without the mustard? And I go, yeah, let me remake this cucumber sandwich. And I come back with, I don't know, a peanut butter sandwich. I didn't remake the cucumber sandwich. It's a different thing entirely. It's not what she asked for.
Yeah.
Good example.
So there's a certain point at which, despite whatever similarities might exist, they're both sandwiches, and I made another sandwich. That's not making a cucumber sandwich differently. It's making a peanut butter sandwich. It's a different thing.
Yeah, and in sort of in a service of good faith, and I don't want to say anything that I have a tendency of saying things that can get some people riled up. So I'm trying not to do that. And in a service of the people who are very set on describing Final Fantasy VII, the Final Fantasy VII remake project as a remake. Obviously, again, large parts of this game or of these games are retelling large portions of the original game in more or less faithful ways, and I think that's worth appreciating. But again, there's this idea of something being recontextualized, and I think recontextualization has a profound impact on how you engage with something, in the sense that we can think of this in terms of spoiler culture, because a lot of the people who talk about things like Final Fantasy VII Online, especially the remake project, are very, very cautious about being spoiled, for example, and they will get very upset if things are spoiled or leaked about the game. And you would think that if that's the case, it's because you appreciate that for you personally, knowing those things going in has like an impact on your experience of that thing. It recontextualizes it because now you know what's going to happen, and you don't want that. You want to just kind of organically experience the things as they sort of evolve or as they happen in the thing that you're engaging with. And it's the same thing for stories themselves. Like certain stories kind of, let's say, internally spoil themselves. Again, Romeo and Juliet is a good example of this. Shakespeare tells us the ending, where this is going, in the very first page of the play. He tells you where this is. It's a tragedy, right? The entire point of the exercise is to watch the tragedy unfold. And I guess the mastery of that story, obviously, is kind of working against that. It's I'm going to tell you that this is not going to end up in a good place, but I want you to kind of emotionally fight that, to sort of, he wants the audience to feel as if, no, maybe it won't, maybe they will get together and there will be a happy ending. And he wants you to kind of hope for that despite of yourself, so that when it concludes, and it concludes exactly as he told you it would, it feels all the more kind of I guess emotionally sour almost, right? That there's a sense of even deeper sense of tragic loss connected to that. And when you appreciate that, inserting something like a precognition or time travel element to something like Final Fantasy, or a previously told story of Final Fantasy, it does very much like entirely recontextualize even those events that are played out faithfully, because you're not in the same headspace engaging with those scenes, because you're not looking for the same things, you're not looking at those events in the same way. And I think because you're constantly thinking, okay, if Aerith knows what is happening or whatever, like, what is she thinking about in this scene? What is she, you try to read the micro expressions in her face and imagine that what's going on in her head. But you wouldn't have done that in the first place if you didn't, if the story hadn't told you that that's what's going on. So, yeah, like, there's a level of recontextualization there that I think, even though I want to be fair to people and say, look at all the stuff that it's doing to retell the story, it's not retelling it in a way that is, I would consider, substantively true to the original plot, because you wouldn't be thinking about those things at all, engaging with the original story, as it were. So,
I see.
I don't know.
Why would someone be concerned about spoilers if they were convinced that this is a faithful remake of something and they've already played the original game? I mean, the only reason that you would sit there being like, no, don't tell me, is because you expect that they're going to deviate. I would assume largely from
Yeah.
what you expect to happen, and that you're excited to see what that's going to be.
Yeah.
So, by admission of being concerned about spoilers, you're recognizing that this isn't. You're even hoping, to some degree, that this isn't
Exactly.
the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, you hit right the nail on the head. That's exactly it. Like, I guess another good like frame of comparison to this, in my opinion, would be The Force Awakens, right? Because you kind of have like a very similar framework of A New Hope and the original trilogy in general, actually, in some ways. Um, and a lot of people go into that saying, oh, it's a very familiar story. You have a familiar plot threads, but a lot of people wouldn't really be calling The Force Awakens a remake of A New Hope, right? Technically speaking, like it harkens back to that thing that they know, but the context is so different that nobody seriously calls that a remake, not even a reimagining, right? But when you change the context so fundamentally to the point that the narrative being presented is just something unrecognizable, it gets to a point where you have to embrace it as either a sequel or just something that shouldn't even be called that thing, like Final Fantasy VII or Star Wars, for example. Just giving a brief idea of that. And also harkening back a bit to what Mike said, like in the beginning of this podcast, actually, like he expressed the feeling that he feels like this is also more of a continuation of things because of how story beats are known ahead of time and how there is this sense of continuity with the compilation and stuff like that. This is I guess this is intentional on their part in the sense that they are trying to design an experience that is also a requel in a lot of ways. I talked to Hian a bit about this, but I never actually talked to you, Mike. Are you familiar with Evangelion by any chance?
Yeah, I've seen the original anime.
Okay.
I don't think I saw the movie, just the original series.
Okay, so the reason I asked this is precisely because of the new theatrical editions, like the four films that came out after the end of Evangelion. Because uh, when you finish the original series, you are left open with the idea that history begins anew, and you're open to the idea of cycles, right? And the films, you in the beginning, it seems like it's a remake, but then you start veering into the direction that it's a radically different story by the end, and it's clearly continuing off of a continuity that is already well established. And uh, Kitase and other people at Square Enix, when the final film was coming out, they had this Q&A, and they said, they were asked, what is the film or game that you're most looking forward to in the year? And they all answered, oh, we're looking forward to the final Evangelion film because we want to see how they complete that type of film, that type of work, and to keep it in mind ourselves. Because at the end of the day, I feel like Remake is trying to get that requel mentality that I guess the Evangelion films popularized, but they're trying to basically apply that to Final Fantasy VII, but in a way that doesn't uh, let's just say it's kind of like a half measure, quoting a bit Hian here. By the way, Hian, you can be as open and like you can talk about anything the way you want. You don't need to be, I guess, careful about like riling people up. I think it's important for people to be as comfortable about their views as possible. Nobody is going to chase anyone here, and if anyone does, like, and people are just they can be radicalized on their own space. They are not going to affect anything. So just also making that clear. So yeah, I feel like this is I think the mentality is basically that, like, they're trying to be a bit of everything. I think that's kind of the reason why there is this division, as Mike said. So yeah, were you guys familiar with the ideas of the concept of requels before, or no? Is this like something that seems random or new to you?
I don't know if I heard that term before, personally, but it's one that I think is fitting for what the FF7 remake project is doing.
Okay.
I think the first time I heard that term was from Bob Iger in an interview pertaining to the Indiana Jones movie. So I'm familiar with the term, and that's kind of how they describe that. Obviously, in the context of Indiana Jones and that franchise, the idea there is very much of sort of like a passing on the torch kind of thing, because obviously the actor who plays Indiana Jones is Harrison Ford is getting very old, and so he can't be doing Indiana Jones forever. And the nature of Indiana Jones as a franchise, sort of replacing him with like an older man who kind of looks like him and kind of sounds like him and just does the same kind of things, is something you can probably do for perpetuity, right? Where because it's just a guy with a whip and a cowboy hat exploring ancient ruins or whatever, and stumbling across various conspiracies. I would even argue that we had a bunch of sort of in Indie Jones like movies for a period of time, with the National Treasure movies with what's his face, Nick Cage, and and we also had the is it Dan Brown novels? Is it, or is
Yeah.
it Dan Brown? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Those
Angel.
novels are also kind of Indie Jones-esque in a, it's a middle-aged guy kind of messing around with historical artifacts and bumbling into conspiracies. But so I think it's fitting there, because when Bob Iger said requel, I think that's what he's talking about. He's talking about kind of retelling Indie Jones stories, but with a new Indie Jones. And in the context of something like Evangelion, I suppose you could use the term, and maybe it's a fitting term for the remake project as well. As for me being candid or whatever, that's more of a me thing. I'm just, I don't want to get bogged too much down into value judgments about Square Enix and their approach to the remake project at this junction. I'm more, I can have my opinions about that, but it's possible to sort of talk about this in a way that doesn't necessarily reflect harsh views on whatever it is that they're doing. I'll leave that to people's imaginations. So.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the core of like a recall is basically a remake, but with a conscious effort of applying it to a continuity that already exists, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that's why I think that's why FF7R or Evangelion. I heard from some people that Steins Gate is kind of like that as well. Like I would say that they're trying. Yeah. Sorry.
No, in the case of something like Steins Gate, I feel like it's obvious, because Steins Gate is already about time travel, right? So that's like baked into the story, and that's what I meant with Indie Jones as well, where Indie Jones has to grow old and die at some point, but that doesn't mean that you can't tell new stories about some person who's in Indie Jones's universe doing the same things that Indie Jones used to do, right?
Exactly.
But it feels a bit strange in the context of Final Fantasy VII, because there was nothing in the original game to suggest that at some point time's going to start looping or
Exactly.
whatever. And
Yeah,
so
that's why.
it's a coming out of left field as far as Final Fantasy VII is concerned.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Like even for the compilation, right? Like I'm it's no secret to anyone who knows me a bit. Like I am definitely not a fan of the compilation myself. I already think that the concepts that they explore go into crazy territory and clash harshly with the source material. But even those works, they never really leave something open for a loop of any kind, right? So this is also why I had like a strong reaction to it. Like, I guess we're kind of delving a bit into what makes a good requel. Like, I guess it's a requel is a special kind of work of art that revisits the past, right? Because it has to have basically the source material needs to be structured in a way that allows for a kind of loop or a kind of similar story happening uh, as a sequel or a prequel to its own story, right? It has to make sense in a way that, remakes, they are not necessarily subject to continuity to the source material. They are more subject to, how good does this remake preserve the original vision and stuff like that. But requels they have that in a way, but also they have the added concern of making sense in that universe. So when you don't have that coherence, I feel like people who catch on that, they have a very strong reaction when they notice that there is this strong cognitive dissonance between what is happening on screen and what should be, coherent with the work that it's being laid out to you. Like this is part of the reason why I had my own reaction to the FF7 project in general. Yeah. So, before I move on, does anybody want to comment on that topic further? Is there anything else you guys want to add?
I don't know if I've ever even had the thought cross my mind what makes a good requel. I don't know if I've ever even spent any amount of time thinking about such a thing. I think that's also possibly largely due to the fact that I'd say within the last 2 years, certainly, if not maybe more like 5, just in my personal life, I have really been latching on, I guess, philosophically to letting go of things from the past and letting them be in the past and not clinging to them and wishing things could go back to being the way they were or whatever, but kind of coming to terms with the fact that everything comes to an end and that there's really a beauty in that. That Kason and I were just discussing this. We recorded our podcast earlier. That will be coming out next week. There's really a beauty in impermanence, I feel like, where this thing isn't going to last forever. At some point, you will lose it. And because of that, you treasure it more and value it more and don't take it for granted. And I feel like living your life with this kind of attitude helps you to get more fulfillment out of your life and not take your life for granted. And if you're so bothered kind of latching on to things and not wanting to let them go, then you'll get stuck in a place where you can't be present, you can't be current, you can't be, in the moment that you're actually living in. And so when it comes to the entire concept of remakes of older works or requels or even in many cases like sequels that are being approached in the way that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is being approached. You brought this up earlier, where they get to the end of a project and they wait to see what the reaction to these sort of deviations are going to be, and then they have maybe a plan A, B, and C that they can go with based on that. It's clearly with any work like this that becomes massively popular and, you know, sort of touches millions of people's lives or whatever, like Final Fantasy VII did, that's going to just be sort of swept up by sort of the corporate mindset and then approached from that point forward with the goal of maximizing whatever profit you can get out of that. And that just in and of itself sort of hurts even those who I believe on this team are adamant and very talented artists doing their very best to make this artistically interesting. But when it comes to planning out a project in this way, it's you can't plan or sort of like place, you know, plants foreshadowing for what's coming up in part 3 if you're not even sure where you're going at that point, because you've got to wait to see, well, what's the fan feedback going to be? That's a very like business-minded approach to storytelling that I just don't think lends itself to the kind of cultural impact that something like the original game had. Now, I'm sure anyone could argue that the cultural impact of this current project is very, very large and that many people are enjoying it, but I would argue we have to wait and see 20 years from now what people think about the Final Fantasy VII Remake project. And, you know, it may very well turn out that I'm wrong about that. But that's not really the point. The point is, if I am adamantly holding on to this idea of what I, you know, want this property, this franchise, this story to represent in the cultural zeitgeist, and I'm seeing that being lost now as remake in like, you know, internet search terms is sort of overtaking the original, right?
Yeah.
And what people see or value as Final Fantasy VII is being replaced with this new project. And I'm sitting here upset about that. That's just going to be a never-ending sort of like state of misery to put myself in. That it is absolutely like regressive. So you have to be able to let go of things and accept the way they are, and in doing so, free yourself from that mindset. And so I've gotten to this point where I'm just not really interested at all in a remake of an older work, no matter what approach they may take with it. That work was made for its time. And I believe that it's better to move on from that, let that thing go. I think it's still a very valuable thing to remember, or, you know, to spend some time reminiscing. And, you know, you have memories for a reason. I think memory is important, but you shouldn't live in them. You should live in the present and visit it once in a while. And I don't know, maybe you could argue that if we are calling the Final Fantasy VII Remake project a sequel, that looking at it that way makes it easier to do that. Like, it makes it easier to just kind of, well, this is not something that necessarily I have to look at as threatening to my memory of this thing. It's just some current trend that will eventually, I think, no longer be something that people really are interested in. But it's clear that the gaming industry at this moment um, is at a state where it's not stable. It cannot support itself with the bloat that it has amassed.
Yeah.
And with the massive amounts of money and time that it takes to make AAA video games, and the necessary recuperation of funds and high sales that must come from that, you cannot risk that on new and interesting projects. It's just too risky in the eyes of these corporations, and so you have to work with something that you already know has a large fan base. And that means you're going to be working with existing properties, which are sequels or remakes of classic titles. And I don't remember which studio it was that I saw recently in the news that said, we're basically only going to be focusing from this point forward on remakes and sequels to existing franchises and no longer making new IPs. This trend is not one that I see gonna be one that lasts a super long time. I think people will get sick of it. I think you're already seeing that fatigue in a lot of people who want to see new and interesting ideas rather than just revisiting. I mean, you could see some of that in the reaction to the fact that I think someone at Sony recently said they don't have any exclusive or new IPs coming to the PlayStation 5 until 2025.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, well, what do we have on this platform in the 4 years that it's been out is almost entirely remakes and sequels to existing powerful franchises and nothing like truly groundbreaking or new in the AAA space. So something has to change there. I think in order for the industry to really be able to be sustainable in the future. But on a personal level, I just think it's important to live in the present moment and not, chain yourself to the past so much. And so I guess I don't think it's valuable to me at this point in my life to, look forward to or really even consider, how can you do a remake right? I'm almost at the point of saying I don't think you can really.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
first of all, I think that's a very inspiring perspective. I think that we should be living in the present and looking into the future. Um, Art is more about trying to, create opportunities for people to express themselves in new, original ways. Sometimes you might even take familiar things and spin them in a way that's completely new, right? Some people would try to make the argument that some remakes do that, but at the end of the day, I think that they're missing the point. That I guess there is something genuine about like creating a completely new IP, or even if you want to say like sequels. Some people might be tired of sequels, but at least with certain series you might have sequels that explore new ideas, new things that are always changing. Like, I know I have this namesake, but I really like to use the example of The Legend of Zelda. It's always, it always has sequels, but you're always exploring new territory. You're always exploring new ways of seeing different themes under a familiar framework. But I feel like are certain franchises who are struggling to make sequels that even do that anymore. Um, and what you said, Mike, about a remake kind of like intoxicating the results and burying the original. I actually find it funny that you say that, because when I was researching for A Living Legacy, my video series on FF7, one of the most annoying things that I had to deal with was trying to find the things that I read a long time ago, because just how Google operates. Even if you type just Final Fantasy VII, the first few things that you're going to see are going to be remake related. If you want to type like Kitase or Nomura and stuff like that, you always find newer quotes. So it's getting harder and harder to preserve history in that regard. It's actually kind of ironic how this works, right? Because technically they would be saying that if you revisit the past, you're also trying to preserve that past to a new generation of people. But when you bring something back, you are unconsciously, in a way, recontextualizing that thing, and you're basically changing the position of that source material in the zeitgeist, right? So yeah, this is part of the reason why my God, I fully agree with a lot of what you said, Mike. I'm I'm actually really impressed. So do you guys? So I know that Mike said that there is no, in his opinion, no real way of making a good remake, I guess. Do you have an idea of that, Hian? Like, what would you say? Like, what are your experiences like with good or bad remakes, remasters, reimaginings? Is there anything in particular that calls your attention that you like to say, "Oh, this is great," or "This is bad"? You
Yeah,
can say
sure.
FF7 remake if you want. Okay, no,
I,
no problem there.
no. Sure, there are a lot of things. I guess first I would like to say that I think it's nice that Mike is joining me on the side of the cult of Mono no Aware, which is those who have a bit of a more let's say focus and a focused appreciation of the transients of things. But I guess when it comes to things like remakes, and something I thought listening to all of what Mike said and what you said is that not to like play devil's advocate here, for because obviously I have my own issues with a lot of remakes, but there's a complicated larger conversation here about the nature of storytelling in general, right? Where even if you tell a new story, ultimately it's still grounded in experiences that you've had and other stories that you've read, and you have these at the risk of sounding a bit rude, trite statements about how there are only 7 stories or whatever, which I think is a kind of reductionist way of thinking about storytelling. But putting that aside, obviously we have tropes, obviously we have things that we want to see in certain stories and expect to see out of certain stories. If you're reading like an epic fantasy story, you probably have certain expectations of what you want that story to consist of, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. And so obviously when people create an epic fantasy story, there are going to be trappings and tropes that reoccur almost just by necessity, because that's the story that you're telling. And in the context of something like a remake, or living in the present, or moving on, or learning to move on, fundamentally, we are all, tiny. We have a little tiny hypocrite inside of all of us, I think, in that respect, right? Where it's like, for example, I've played tons of Japanese role-playing games over the years, far too many to even begin listing off the top of my head. And I do that, obviously, even though all of them are different games with different stories and stuff like that. I do that because there's some level of kind of revisitation going on there. Almost, there's a cycle there. It's the same thing, but in a different wrapping with different names and different locations. But there's still this kind of element of retreading that's inherent to just the process of engaging with art and media as a whole. But I just think when it comes to something like a remake, where that's distinct from just, you can read something that's kind of like Lord of the Rings, but it's not Lord of the Rings. Or you can engage with a remake of Lord of the Rings. And I think where the distinction arrives here between those two types of things is that when somebody writes a remake of Lord of the Rings or creates one, they're stuck squarely in essentially trying to recapture whatever creative spirit somebody else sort of held when they made that original work. So when Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, if you decide to rewrite Lord of the Rings or remake Lord of the Rings or whatever, you're always kind of walking in his footsteps in a very overt way, which is still uncomfortably divorced from sort of whoever Tolkien was and whatever he was thinking and feeling when he actually wrote that book. Whereas if you're writing something that's kind of like Lord of the Rings, but it's still your story, your your product, your art, then you're imbuing that with all the things that are intimate and personal to you that have nothing to do with Tolkien. So even if you're telling like a derivation of Lord of the Rings, it's still fundamentally, I think, in most respects, your story at the end of the day. And that's what makes it valuable, because when you make your own kind of almost kind of like Lord of the Rings-ish story, Lord of the Rings still stands there on its own by itself. Lord of the Rings is Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is Tolkien's. And when you read Lord of the Rings, you get Tolkien's kind of spirit, right? And then you have your story next to that, which is kind of like Lord of the Rings in many respects, but that's your story and that's your spirit, right? In that. And it actually fundamentally makes it easier to remember the past that way, if you're so inclined. If you're the kind of person who has one foot in the present and one foot in the past, maybe, and maybe a third proverbial foot in the future, I think it makes it easier to change tracks when that is what the landscape of art looks like. But it's very hard to do that the more you make these remakes, because, like, in concrete terms, as you both said, you get these issues with Google searches, and you get miscommunications, right? Are you talking about the original Final Fantasy VII now, or are we talking about the remake? Like, it confounds the culture surrounding that and the attribution of new, like, quote unquote new ideas. So I very much agree that it's very hard to do a remake right, but bringing it all back again here, there are a lot of works that I can think of that are, technically speaking, remakes to one extent or another, that I think are really fantastic. And John Carpenter's The Thing is a great example of that, because that's based on the novella Who Goes There from 1938 by John W. Campbell Jr., which itself, also the movie, like, is a remake essentially of the 1951s, I think, The Thing from Another World. So that's gone through a lot of different iterations, but I think by far that the movie, the final movie, The Thing, by John Carpenter, is probably the best of all of those. So, you have exceptions to that. I'm also a huge fan of the Hannibal series, which I prefer both to The Silence of the Lambs. I prefer it to Manhunter. I prefer it to the actual novels by Thomas Harris. So it's not like, it's not like you can't have that, where somebody just takes somebody else's work and actually makes something even better out of it. But I don't feel as if that has anything to do almost with the conversation on remakes, because I think it's almost entirely arbitrary. I'm sure that there are, just like there are coincidences in this universe, that maybe there's even the story that I'm writing right now. It could be that there's some person sitting somewhere in a bedroom who would be a better writer for that story than I am, right? That's not impossible. I can imagine that. And so if he were to rewrite everything I wrote, maybe that's the superior novel. Who knows, right? That could happen. And I think we kind of have to be open to that and not get stuck in these tracks where we're moving on these kind of inscrutable principles. But having said that, that doesn't seem to be the case most of the time. Most of the time, again, you have people just kind of walking in the footsteps of other people in a way that doesn't capitalize on whatever spirit made the original work really great. Mm-hmm. And it also doesn't contribute anything of value in terms of the people making it contributing their spirit or whatever to the larger landscape of art, right? Because they're so stuck trying to keep water cupped in their hands, right? Trying to, I want to remake Lord of the Rings, right? I want to do the thing that Tolkien did again 30 years later, but you're not Tolkien. And
Yeah, I guess.
you're just so divorced from that. You can't do it.
Yeah, I guess it's because a lot of these artists are a bit over their heads, right? When they're holding onto, IPs that are so culturally significant that either they're more concerned about their paycheck, like this is going to be a guaranteed hit, so I feel like it's a very safe type of work. As Mike said, there is a certain security to this type of work. And there are also
Yeah,
some
obviously.
people who, I guess J.J. Abrams, who, with all his creative bankruptcy, with all due respect, there is a certain level of, oh, I'm in the footstep, I'm following in the footsteps of somebody I admired their work in the past, and I think that I can do better than them, and but I can also correct their original vision because I think my vision is better than theirs. Like there is this certain conflict of visions to begin with that you start to question if the companies who are allocating these quote unquote talents to handle these remakes are even the proper ones, right? Because I think that these types of works, they demand people to understand the spirit and respect the vision that the original author had, like what you were saying about somebody who is not following the sensitivities of Tolkien. I think that's the big issue a lot of people have with remakes. I think that it's important to have a person who understands that spirit at the end of the day. So really nice.
Sure, right.
Yeah,
At
sorry.
least if they either that or they have some sort of spirit themselves that they can contribute. That's unique and
Mm-hmm.
interesting because, again, I think the largest problem is when you are trying to capture the spirit of something that you don't really understand. So, uh, I don't. Kind of trying to think of a personal experience that I haven't had that would be very difficult to write about, but. I don't know. I don't know what it's like to work on an oil platform in the Bering Sea or something like that, right? And so, if I was gonna, I don't know, remake a movie that was, I don't know, written by a guy who actually had that life experience,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose it would be very hard to do that. But of course, you can imagine the opposite too. You can imagine some guy in his bedroom who decided to write about an oil platform, but he'd never actually been on an oil platform, and then I actually have been on a oil platform, and then I'm asked to remake it, and then maybe my remake would be better than whatever he made in the first place. So I don't think it's a zero-sum game, but I just think that it's better for the world as a whole and for people that they kind of ransack their own feelings and try to figure out what is it that I have, what are my experiences, and uh, what's my life and what does that look like and how can I pour that into a work and make it my own and release that and have it stand together with the rest of the humankind's legacy of art instead of trying to recreate something that's not entirely yours to begin with. And it even goes for recreating things that you made yourself. I've composed music for um, at least, well, almost 2 decades now. And when I go back and listen to like things I composed in MIDI 2 decades ago, you know, I don't know if it's even worth trying to remake or realize those projects because that's not the headspace where I'm at anymore. If I'm gonna start tinkering with those tracks, I'm probably gonna, pardon my French here, I'm gonna fuck something up, right? It's not gonna be because that's not where I was at when I composed those things. I'm not in the same headspace anymore. I'm a different person, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's worth it. Anyways.
Okay.
There's one thing I'd like to clarify about something that I said, and that is, first of all, I think that a lot of these remake projects in the last couple of years, let's say, Dead Space, Resident Evil 4, even the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I think are all excellent games. So when I say that, you can't really make a good remake, what I'm talking about is not like the quality of the thing on like a technical level.
Absolutely.
It's more about, is it possible to recapture the spirit of a thing and deliver it again in sort of like a modern context? That's the part that I don't think is possible. But there's no doubt that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a very, very high quality video game that has a very sound set of battle mechanics, that is highly polished in its performance, that has excellent cinematics, top quality animation, all of these things. So, it deserves, I think, the review scores and ratings that it gets, because at the end of the day, you cannot look at that video game and denigrate it outside of what we're talking about, which is a much different level of subjectivity, first of all, but second of all, something that doesn't really apply to whether you classify something as a well-made video game.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to clarify that if you're going to try to more or less recreate something that was already made and is a classic, it's so difficult that I would classify it as being as near impossible as I can even imagine to recapture what that was again. Which has led me to believe, and I didn't think this way, years and years ago when I was calling for a Final Fantasy VII Remake back on the PlayStation 2 and, PlayStation 3 and things like that, right? When I was looking for that and hoping they would do that. Obviously, back then, I didn't feel this way. I felt like you could. But it's only in seeing this happen over and over and over again that, and having the experience of playing it and being like, yeah, this is technically really good, but you can't recapture the context that surrounded it in its time, and what represented at that time, and who you were at that time, and the freshness of it. And I mean, just by the very nature of this being something you've already played before, you can't experience that again. You already know. Yeah, so there's I have almost come around on this in a way to where, while I don't necessarily appreciate the way in which the Final Fantasy VII Remake developers are going about trying to create a fresh experience or something that stands on its own away from the original, I don't fault them for trying to do that, or for recognizing that there's no way that they could have really satisfactorily, outside of like maybe just sort of the base level nostalgia. I think Kitase has been quoted in an interview somewhere saying, you get that dose of nostalgia for your first 30 minutes and then it's kind of over and you just stop playing. I think a lot of people do that. They don't necessarily finish it if it's too similar to the original thing. So I see where he's coming from in that. I see the impossible sort of task it is to even try. So why not, try to do a reimagining in the style of, I would say, something like Romeo and Juliet, or Magnificent Seven, or something like that does a really radically different, so almost genre hop and setting, and just a totally different take on it in a totally different setting, where it's like certain elements of this are recognizable, but there's this whole different like spin I feel like that is almost the best approach, at least the
Yeah.
way I think about it now, versus trying to, in a more literal way, remake it, but like in, higher fidelity graphics and music. And I don't know that can be done in a way that would ultimately be successful enough to justify, especially the enormous effort they're putting into this. If you're just gonna, remaster the thing, replace the models with fresher ones, kind of like the modding community has done with the original Final Fantasy VII, I think that's, something you can satisfy people with who are looking for just replaying the game, but with a fresh coat of paint. But anyway, I just wanted to clarify that.
No, that's perfect. You touched on a fantastic point there, actually, because one of the things that kind of rubs me the wrong way in terms of looking at the reviews for Rebirth is that I guess there is a separation between what the people value. I guess that's the subjective part of what you were talking about, and how they're trying to evaluate the game's qualities on its own. But I feel that there is a very important aspect that not a lot of people, when they give those high scores, are taking into consideration, which is there is a normative expectation and understanding of what a remake should be, or not even just a remake, a requel. Like the fact that there is this positioning of this work within the framework of a franchise. There are certain things that it needs to be respected in order to be qualified as good. So this is why I 100% see what you're saying, that you can look at like RE4 or FF7 remake and saying that they are great games. I 100% agree with you that there are inherent qualities if they are in isolation. Like there is certainly fantastic ideas behind their combat design, their art direction. You might argue that is also something that looks very inspired. Their musical direction as well, like it's something that might hit you the perfect way, etc. But there is this important aspect of identity that is part of the IP, that it's being remade or provided a requel, that needs to be evaluated under that framework. Like you can't just take like Star Wars and then make a film that's more like Star Trek in essence. These things are going to clash fundamentally because identity preservation is important. So if I were to look at FF7 Rebirth, for example, and the review scores that are coming out. I know we're talking a lot about Rebirth, but I think this applies in general to how people review like remakes, like the Disney live action films. They seem to be missing the point of like, if I were to look at FF7, what exactly made FF7 FF7? Oh, the story, right? The story is one of the biggest drawing points that defined its identity. Like with the Disney remakes, like there is this universality of presentation and musical direction that are crucial to those films. And when you look at the reviews and you see that there are a lot of people praising those works, you don't see people touch upon these things that are so fundamental to what defines what they're being sold as. So that's what frustrates me, is that there is this level of normative art criticism that is not being taken into consideration. So I guess I'm with you there in that you could say that it's a good remake, or a good game or a good film, but it's still the fact that it's still being labeled as a remake, and a Final Fantasy VII remake or a Snow White remake. You still need to abide to that thing that you are remaking, the fact that you need to respect the source material in certain aspects that need to preserve its most important things. So that's why I completely understand. I completely understood you what you said, Mike. Before you clarified that there is this different scopes of analysis of like saying that something that might have a great production value and have great contributions from artists who are very passionate. I don't think any one of us here would be willing to say that there aren't any artists there who aren't passionate or who don't care about the original game or the original film. I'm absolutely certain I can see a lot of their passion in those projects, but there there still needs to be like a direction that needs to be coherent with the things that they are remaking, right? So now drawing back to the point that we were driving forwards, the reason why I was trying to guide you guys to like your experiences with remakes, etc., is that I feel like we're in a time where we are very dissatisfied with the trend of remakes and remasters, and we're seeing a lot of failed attempts at revisiting the past. And it might feel to us sometimes that perhaps this thing really is as impossible, in a certain way, as Mike is saying. It's very important to have that non-diegetical context that defines like the work when it was created. Like the artist needs to have that mindset that Hian talked about when he was working on his musical works, or like 90s anime that have that sense of existential value to things in a way that's very universally recognizable. It's not that corporate as it is today. There are certain aspects that need to be in the right spot in the right place, and it's hard to recapture that. I 100% agree with you there. But there are certain merits to revisiting the past that I think it's dangerous if we forget them because of all these failed attempts. So for example, like in terms of remasters, I think that remasters are not that hyped anymore because everybody wants to do their own spin, their own remake on things, or do requels or reimaginings. But remasters like 2001: A Space Odyssey, like you have someone like Christopher Nolan, who has already done a film similar to, not similar, but like a spiritual successor to 2001 in Interstellar, and then he spent a lot of money in rescanning the film and trying to provide a color grading that enriches the film in certain ways that there is a certain level of preservation value in remasters there that I think should not go unnoticed. Remakes, I have a more like, I guess, pragmatic view on that. Like remakes in terms of audiovisual media, I gave a little hint of that in the beginning of the podcast. Remakes, they used to have a more like course correction aspect of them. Like it's usually directors who even at the time when they released a certain work, they weren't very satisfied with how things turned out, and they see that there are ways to preserve that vision that they had, but they now that some time passed, they have like access to certain things that might bring their vision to life a lot better now. So two examples that I have for this. I don't know how much you guys are into Alfred Hitchcock. These are, classic thriller films. If you guys haven't watched any of his films, I highly recommend them. But one of the first examples of remakes in film history is The Man Who Knew Too Much. There was a version in the 1930s, which was, Hitchcock was famous in saying that, he wasn't satisfied with the work all the way back then. And he only did one remake in his entire career, which was for this film in the 1950s. And if you watch both experiences, you realize, you understand the value in bringing that thing back, and trying to structurally improve that work, and trying to bring that vision in a stronger light. So and this, a second example, one in the realm of video games, is, in my opinion, a gold standard for remakes in that field. I don't know if you guys played it, but Link's Awakening on the Switch. There is, I know it might seem like to some people, they don't know, oh, it's like a toy version of the original, but there are certain sensitivities behind Link's Awakening that you realize, the world is extremely faithful. The characters and the story, they're all preserved, but the way that they bring back this original work to this new setting, to this new form of presentation, only heightened its story and experience. Why do I say this? You have, if you were playing on the Game Boy, Link's Awakening, you always had that same look, like as the older Zelda games. Like the sprites, they always have this very familiar look to them. They don't really coexist with like the art that you see for the game, and like the cover boxes and manuals, etc. So, but when you play Link's Awakening, you start to understand that they chose this aesthetic for the gameplay, like this toy Link, quote unquote, because not only does this look match the sprite work from the original more faithfully, but it also brings a contrast to the opening, which is closer to the art of the original game. In a way that you understand that, wow, I don't know if you guys played it, I don't know if it's okay to spoil it, but basically there is this idea that the world that he's exploring in Link's Awakening is not real. There is a very psychological backing in this experience. Like, Link is exploring a bit of his own memories within this world that is created by this deity that is asleep, and the more he tries to break away from those memories, the more he is able to get back to reality, but in the process he's also, quote unquote, killing off the town and the city and these people that he is meeting that are reflections of his memories. So you have this emotional connection to them. And why is this relevant? Because the art direction that we have now with the remake, it communicates directly with the nature of the world and the story that is being told. Like the bloom effect around the screen, a lot of people say, oh, it's because it's meant to make things more shiny and more beautiful. But when you play the game and you realize why the story goes the direction it goes, you start to realize that, this bloom effect actually plays a role to illustrate the dream aspect of this universe, that you aren't even aware that this is the purpose for that. So, and you update the mechanics in a way that is actually very fluid. And so you have, at the end of the day, a story that is heightened by the presentation that it otherwise didn't have. You have a story and characters that are preserved under this new vision, and you have a gameplay experience that is so much better than the original in terms of like just how things communicate with each other, how responsive everything is, how item management works, etc. So there is merit, I think, in bringing things back if you have an artist that has a good sense of what they are bringing back and how to improve and how to maybe take that original vision and expand on it. A lot of people talk about remakes qualities, like FF7 remake or Rebirth in particular, whichever one you prefer, that the biggest thing that people are like, oh, it's super amazing, etc., because it's always expanding. Don't you like more content? Don't you like expansions? I think that the key here is not that expansions on their own are the things that that should drive remakes, but expanding responsibly, expanding coherently with the artistic vision of the source material. So I guess this might sound like a bit naive, but I still wish that we don't lose sight of artists who can bring remakes to life, that provide this improvement, in the artistic vision of what came before. Even if it's hard to bring back that mentality from 20, 30 years ago, there are some artists who are still able to pull that off. I guess it's more like that. I'm not that in favor of, remakes of classics just because they're classics and just because people love them. I tend to see more merit in remakes that are done to improve what was seen back then as something that wasn't that great. So if I were, for example, today to ask for a remake of a Final Fantasy game, I would ask for a remake of Final Fantasy 2 or Final Fantasy 8. I would never ask for a remake of Final Fantasy 7. For Zelda, I would instantly ask for a remake of Zelda 2, not Ocarina of Time. I guess that's kind of like what this is, the mentality that remakes used to have in film, in cinema, but now because people are so hooked into this nostalgia culture, a lot of what is like what's worth remaking went from fixing things that can be improved in a better light, in a way that can more good media can coexist, and more like bringing back what was already fantastic and try to capitalize on that. So yeah. I guess I rambled a bit there too long, but I think that was important to lay out.
The only, because I understand for sure where you're coming from. I think I've probably made similar arguments somewhere in the past, but I think that, like, well, for instance, we're talking about games that you see as maybe benefiting more from being remade because they were lacking in some way, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's other people that I know who are massive fans of Final Fantasy VIII that would probably very much feel differently about that. And maybe this is a better way to do it, because this is something I would play. If they were to remake Vagrant Story in the vein of like a Souls-like, I believe personally that it would improve that experience dramatically. And so I would be very interested in that. But there's no doubt that those who maybe loved Vagrant Story's systems and gameplay as it was would see that as being kind of a betrayal of its spirit in some way, right? Now that's a more dramatic example than your Link's Awakening example, but for me, it depends on whether or not you even feel in the first place that said game is lacking, or if there's any really even kind of consensus on that. And I would say that that's probably not true for any of the mainline Final Fantasies, maybe outside of Final Fantasy II. I think that's the one that people look at with, for the most part, negatively. But I don't know. For me, when we're talking about revisiting the past, I think the way that, say, the newest Tomb Raider remaster does it is a way that I think is a really good way of going about that, because you can just like toggle on and off the original game with like the new, remastered look to it. And I think there's something about that kind of quick, easy comparison that you can do, where you can kind of get the best of both worlds, where, oh my gosh, I didn't remember it looking like that. That's crazy. Oh, wow, look how far we've come, or whatever. But you can essentially just go through and play to the T the exact same thing again, right? I think there's value in that. for sure. I think if I were to be put, for some reason, not being a game developer, at the head of a project with the goal of remastering a classic, that is for sure the avenue I would approach it with, because you give your players a choice, right? Like at any point they can just like replay the thing on their new hardware and make it really convenient for them to access it, and it's essentially just a port of the original thing, or they can put the new music or put the new graphics on or play it with a new control scheme or the original one. um, I think when you do it that way, you give people a chance to really revisit their past without altering it to such a degree that it no longer really resembles the thing they were looking to revisit. Um, in the way that, say, a game like Final Fantasy VII Remake does, where, I mean, it's such a different just game from the baseline gameplay that it doesn't really resemble what it was at all. And I'm not, again, saying that as a value judgment. I'm just saying if your goal is to revisit the past, which I don't think is a bad thing, revisiting it, reminiscing, I think all these are valuable things, as long as, you're not living there all the time. But, um, but revisiting can be, I mean, I reread books all the time. I can't tell you how many times I've reread The Lord of the Rings or The Silmarillion. I mean, many, many times. So this is coming from somebody who obviously values doing that a lot. But the last thing I would want to do is be like, I want to revisit Lord of the Rings, but I'd like to get some modern author to rewrite this book in like a modern context with modern sensibilities. That's not revisiting the past. It's just rewriting a book and changing it to whatever, whatever, trying to remove, say, like something that would be offensive in like today's context, or change it in a way that would be less that way, or change the language.
They're not dwarves, Mike. They're little people.
Yeah, they're little people. Yeah.
So, this is such a weird conversation when I really think about it, because no one would ever expect to do this. Like, if I'm going to revisit Jurassic Park, I'm just going to go watch the freaking movie that I watched as a kid. I'm not going to like, oh man, I really wish someone would come around and just make this same movie again, beat for beat, but like film it in a digital format with like better CGI or whatever. Like, I just go watch
lens flares.
Yeah, you just go watch the thing again and revisit the past. So I think the only reason why this is even a conversation with video games is because it was such a infant medium that there was this idea, particularly with how fast it was progressing between like generations, that, oh man, this thing was only like a couple years ago, but it could look so much better now on this console. Like, it's just not really comparable to other things. And so there was this idea that like, I'd really like to see that thing, but it was literally just a couple years ago that it came out, we're not talking about necessarily jumping back 20 years. Now, I mean, now we are, but at the time, hopefully what I'm saying makes sense. It's just a weird thing that it's only with video games that we even think of it this way. Oh, we could get like some superior version of this because now the hardware is not going to hold it back like it was before. And
there is actually a caveat to that with films that I see a lot, which is the advent of CGI. Like, I think you touched on this point briefly there, and I think you hit the nail in the head there as well. Like, I guess people are...
But it's bound up with computer graphics, right?
Exactly. So the idea is that there are a lot of people who, look at old films and they say, oh, I can't watch this because, the effects are so primitive, etc. So we're in a generation that people are used to seeing things that are very realistic. They want to feel like the world and the things that are foreign to their lives is as realistic, palpable, and believable as possible. So with films, I think that a lot of people are, I guess, hooked into this search for realism, that in films it takes longer, I guess, for people to for the works to show their age, quote unquote, compared to video games, which is what you said, Mike. Like it's a medium that is so young, but it progressed so fast that the generational and technological leaps that happened over the years made games made in like between like in a period of like 10 years in the 90s look so like it's unbelievable. It's unrecognizable. You go from 2D to 3D, then from the early 3D you jump 10 years and you're already in like the PlayStation 3 era, and you see such a massive leap in quality of, you know, visuals and everything. So I guess there is this reliance on hardware and computer graphics that made a lot of people's idea of the necessity to remake something more along the lines of, I want to experience this again, but now with visuals that makes it feel like it's actually real, you know, because CGI or you know the latest graphical engines in the industry can provide me this exact experience. Now with virtual reality, it's still a bit niche, but who knows, maybe that explodes, and then we're going to have like remakes in VR of classics, and then people are going to be obsessed about this idea of living that thing that they love so much as vividly as possible. What you were going to say, Hian?
I was just going to say that I think there's a certain level of facileness, I guess, to this as well, on the level of the probably the age bracket of people who, like the majority of people who grew up with video games or even play video games today, because most of them are children and teens, right? But the thing about sort of wanting something to be represented in higher fidelity, and as you said, you both touched on it, and connection to kind of realism, it strikes me that there's a profound kind of misunderstanding about art as an exercise when it's framed like that in somebody's mind, insofar as there's no writing in the sky anywhere that says that the purpose of art is to be realistic. And I find this view extremely kind of frustrating to see reflected in people's attitudes, just by virtue of the fact that when I sit down and play a game of chess, I'm not sitting there thinking, you know what's really wrong with this? What this exercise really needs is, I actually need like a chessboard that's the size of a parking lot, and then I need real people with swords on horses and in full armor, and then I want to like sit there and tell, you know, Rook, go over there and kill that person, right? Like that would really improve chess for me. That then, you know, chess would be, because we understand chess is a fucking board game, right? It's supposed to be abstract. It doesn't need to be realistic. I'm not sitting here thinking, why is it that the knight can move in like an L shape but not in a different, like, what is this arbitrary? Well, this seemingly arbitrary rule is there to facilitate a game, and games are inherently abstract activities, right? They might have some evolutionary benefit to some of them, like if you're playing hide and seek or catch or whatever. I'm sure that's something that humanity developed in service of having their young basically develop survival skills in the wild. But I mean, games as exercise, and it goes for storytelling too. You could say a lot of the same things for old stories. I grew up with fairy tales, being a Scandinavian, and so I was exposed to a lot of these very silly fairy tales. I don't know if you have equivalents wherever you guys are from, but like, why is it that the bear has like a short tale. It's because like the fox told the bear to go fishing in the ice and put his tail into the lake, and then a fish came and bit it off or something. There's a fairy tale like that. This is not sophisticated storytelling by modern standards. Nobody, where's the lore that explains why the animals can talk to each other? How is it that the bear and the fox can communicate, right? Where's the character arc for the fox? Why is the fox is not a relatable villain? There's no insight into the fox's psychology. Blah blah blah. And it's not sophisticated writing by any stretch of the imagination. But I feel like we wouldn't say, therefore, the fox and the bear story or the scorpion and the toad crossing the river story, they need remakes, right? We need to take these stories and we need to give the scorpion and the fox inner conflict and character development. We need to give them a really, really thick backstory to explain why the scorpion and the fox is so mean. That's silly. We could say this for virtually every medium, every genre, everything that's ever existed. And when it comes to certain art, it is fine for it to be simple. It's fine for it to work within its sort of contemporary constraints. And if anything, I think often once we get a more mature view of art, one that reflects an appreciation of the history of art, we also learn to recognize that a lot of these constraints and these limitations and these genre and time-specific flourishes, while they can be perceived as sort of scratches in the paint or flaws or what have you, they're also integrally linked to a lot of the charm and the things that are good about that work. And you can't scrub that off the work without taking taking other parts away as well that are contingent upon those flaws, because the merits of the work are visible to us as juxtapositions to those flaws. If you remove the flaw, you remove the good parts with it. It's imaginable to me on a conceptual level that these two things are not distinct, that there are places where you can't just fix one part of the work. You can't just fix that and then it's good. And a great example of that is in how people upscale textures for old games. One game that I think looks really good when played on an emulator, for example, is Final Fantasy Type 0. It looks really good on an emulator with like a CRT filter and a little bit of bloom and some other After Effects and stuff. It looks great. You play the HD remaster of that, in my opinion, it looks like dog shit. It looks 500 times worse than the original game, because all they've done is that they've taken all these textures and they've gone into Photoshop or whatever, and they've made these like really nice 4K textures or whatever for the game. But the problem is that when they're just slapped on top of low poly meshes, and there's no dynamic lighting or anything else, it looks weird and plasticky, and it completely destroys any sense of mood, any sense of atmosphere that was there in the original game, and it just looks absolutely terrible. Yeah, sure, the fidelity is higher, but you've just destroyed the atmosphere in the entire game in pursuit of your fidelity, and you have to ask yourself, like, what's the point of that? It's completely ass backwards. You've sacrificed the careful use of low poly aesthetics for a particular artistic type of expression in just blind pursuit of higher fidelity, or in the service of quote unquote realism. And you've seen this in conversation in art history elsewhere, like when Monet and the other sort of high-profile painters of Impressionism came along. People who were obsessed with national romanticism and, of course, realism in the history of painting, they thought that Impressionism was trash, right? Why can't these people paint detailed, realistic pictures? What's wrong with them? Like, this is this isn't proper art because it's not realistic. or whatever. But that's missing the point of the entire exercise. There's so much more that's being said through the use of negative space and hinting at things through the use of abstraction in impressionist paintings than you get in something like let's say, very straightforward and boring national romanticism painting or one from the era of realism. So it's sad to me. There is a fundamental lack of artistic appreciation and art theory appreciation when it comes to how people think about video games in this particular regard. But anyways,
what a phenomenal example! What a phenomenal example! I'm sorry, like I as a fan, as a fan of impressionism, like that is fantastic because I think abstraction is like at the heart of communicating something in ways that realism cannot. Like abstraction is just a way to enhance reality in ways that you can produce aesthetic values to people to see like a beauty or a message in a way that you could not communicate in realism. And there are a lot of people who are so caught up in like the technical details and trying to reproduce realistic features in the most faithful way possible, like both in painting and now in today with computer graphics, that a lot of people are missing the point that you said, that art is about communicating and creating aesthetic values for people to appreciate, and that is not tied to realism. That is tied to the presentation choices that the artist has, like their own values. That's the
yeah, it's all editing. It's like George Lucas said, right? It's all fake. The CGI is fake, sure, but the props are fake too. It's all fake. And the same thing with stories. Stories are not pictures of reality. If you're writing a story, you're writing a story. You're not writing a history, right? Or you're not writing a documentary. You're writing a story, and implied in that is the fact you're hiding and certain parts of reality. You're shifting the focus of the audience to the magic of the moment, editing out certain things, emphasizing others, and sort of abstraction is one of the greatest tools for doing that. And some of that it happens by accident, obviously, due to things like tech limitations or sensitivities of the time. But I think you do humanity a disservice and the legacy of art as a whole if you don't recognize that and you go through this kind of revisionist process of taking those artifacts of our past and throwing it through a blender to kind of quote unquote update it and make it quote unquote better. If by better you mean just upping the fidelity of things or making it more realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a sense of well, if we're going to use Final Fantasy VII as example, right? I think maybe in the minds of kids who were growing up playing that, they would have assumed that the reason that these blocky chibi models were used in the map screens rather than the taller, more proportioned ones in battle was because of some limitation of the PlayStation, when in fact you look at the concept art for this game and they drew them as chibi dudes and as taller proportioned because that was the whole plan from the beginning. And in fact, it was a major source of contention between Hironobu Sakaguchi and Yoshinori Kitase about how they should, what the look of this series should be in the future, and why you get Final Fantasy VIII being these proportioned, more realistic looking characters, and then Final Fantasy IX they go back to little, squarish chibi people. So, when you then do something like they're doing the Final Fantasy VII remake, which is this like real pursuit of a high sense of realism, which takes away a lot of the abstraction that they had in the original. There's that's an art direction thing, right? Like like Hian is saying, like impressionism versus realism. Like that's a choice made by an artist to use that format of abstraction to communicate something. And as you said, Hylian, that you cannot communicate in with realism. So they used the chibi dudes because it's way more natural to have them leaping across the room to express their uh, excitement or whatever. It makes a lot more sense for a little Lego person to do that than for a realistic looking human to do that. So you can't express that emotion in the same way when you've changed the entire art direction. So the pursuit of realism as some form of like making something into a quote unquote better, you know, higher quality work is nonsense. And again, this isn't even to say that their choice to do that in the remake, I'm not making a quality judgment about that, or the look of the remake, which obviously is fantastic for what they were going for. But to say that if you think it's better only because it's more realistic, which I think, as Hian was alluding to, is probably the kind of thing I would have thought as a teenager, who had zero understanding of or really any art literacy at all. You learn this and you go, oh, that was a choice they made in the original on purpose, and it's because you can't get this across in any other way. Just like an impressionist painter can't get across what they're trying to do, in a different medium. So
Yeah, that's perfectly on point. I actually find it funny how some people actually bring up the limitation aspect behind FF7 as well. When from FF1 to 5, they've always represented characters as chibi sprites in the overworld, but when you enter a battle, they have a completely different look, more proportioned look to them. So you kind of wonder, like, there's no way that hardware limitations plagued them for like 3 different generations to the point where they can't use these proportioned people in the overworld. Like, once you pay attention to these things, you realize that it is an intentional artistic direction that Hironobu Sakaguchi had, for a lot of the reasons you said, Mike. Like,
especially when there's so many contemporary examples that show that those hardware were perfectly capable of doing this thing that apparently someone thought was a limitation on the PlayStation.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's also, I think a lot of people also forget context here, where obviously there were tech limitations to the PlayStation that had an impact on development, but what people forget is that the previous hardware they worked on was the Super Nintendo. They had 8 megabytes at most to make games on and to run on that console, and they had like 16 sound channels, and the jump from the Super Nintendo to the PlayStation is unimaginably enormous in comparison to the leaps from, well, maybe the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2 is almost kind of like a similar deal, but it's not even that, isn't that, right? And every console after that, the jump has had a smaller and smaller payoff. So, people failing to put themselves in the shoes of the developers at the time. If you've been developing games on the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo before it, where you had to literally limit the in-game text because it ate up too much space on the cartridge, and suddenly you're being told that, well, now you can make a game where you have 700 megabytes by 3. The idea that the developers at the time would be sitting there scratching their head going like, oh, Jesus Christ, we're so constrained. We can't do anything that we want. Like, they would be over the moon just being, what? You mean we can use, like, images to, we can make pre-rendered backgrounds? What? This is very kind of hindsight, I forget the saying, but it's very much kind of like a hindsight kind of thing, where it's where you just, we can imagine today how constrained they must have been by looking at the PlayStation, but that's not the mindset they were at in 97. And you see it reflected in interviews from 97, where all the developers, including Nomura, are just gushing about how much more they can do now, and they're all just like wildly excited about it, of all the potential that they have, right? To to express themselves way beyond, because obviously with the constraints of the time, they wouldn't be asking questions like, they wouldn't be sitting there going, Jesus, we can't have voice acting? That's so dumb, right? Because no games had, but very few games had voice acting at the time. So that wouldn't even have factored into their minds when they were conceptualizing the game to begin with. Nobody on the Squaresoft team were sitting there thinking, if only we could have voice acting for this game at that time, because that wouldn't have been a realistic thing to expect in the first place. And it's...
Yeah.
There's just like... a lack, like blinders, when it comes to putting yourself in the shoes of people who lived in that period of time. But I guess I shouldn't be too harsh on people who express that sentiment, given that many of them probably didn't even live, or probably weren't particularly old during the 90s like we are. But
Yeah,
It's very true.
yeah, definitely. One thing before we move on, I want to make a slight correction on something that I may have communicated. When I say that I am open to, for example, remaking Final Fantasy VIII, and how I would have this mentality of remakes as a sort of way to provide enhancements and corrections to things that the artist at the time wasn't satisfied with. What you said, Mike, about changing the gameplay design to something more like Vagrant Story with Dark Souls gameplay, or what Final Fantasy VII did with turning an ATB, more turn-based oriented combat to something more action oriented, even if it retains some of the ATB elements behind it. If I were to be remaking something like that, I would approach it kind of like what Link's Awakening did, in the sense that the mechanics and the base idea of how the gameplay is designed, how it works, that should keep intact. I think the idea of remaking a game as well, like different from just a movie, because a movie you can only take care of the story and art direction, etc., and you can handle those things much easier. But with gameplay, you have a completely new realm to be worried about. But I'm the kind of person who isn't that hesitant with experimenting with gameplay. I know that gameplay defines identity, so I would obviously prioritize that first. But I am not the kind of person who isn't satisfied with the remake project because they dropped the original battle system. I am open to experiencing new ways of playing that experience, but I'm more thinking that remakes have a bigger merit when they're preserving the core things that built the original, but you are expanding responsibly on top of that. So with FF8, for example, maybe create the junction system in a way that is easier to understand, and provide a tutorial that isn't as it's not that it's a hard system to understand. I played it fine, I understood it fine, but there were a lot of people who had trouble grasping like its qualities, etc. So maybe changing the way this is communicated and making things a bit more intuitive. That's more the idea of what I was talking about. Not that FF8 is not that great. Like, even I admit that I personally think that FF8 is on the lower end, but of the classic Final Fantasy era. But I am not. When I say that, I'm not saying as in a way that to basically quote unquote crap on the FF8 fans or anything like that. What I'm saying is that there is so much more space to grow, you know, that it's worthwhile that there are some remakes that explore this potential. I think that remakes, the main merit for remakes, in my opinion, is seeking works that have potential that failed to be explored in the vision of the author, you know. So I guess that's even if I know that Hian just said about technical limitations, and that designers, when they are making the thing that they are making, they are aware of the limitations and they try to convey their vision the best way possible at that time. I'm not bringing like the remake fan type of argument here, but what I'm saying is that there are a number of instances where there is a vision, and due to a number of circumstances, the artist at the time just wasn't able to convey the final product in a way that they wanted. And there is some
Sure.
potential that wasn't explored. So that's the main
Yeah,
thing that I want
absolutely.
to correct, just being clear here.
Yeah, sure. I think you got that across. I guess the only caveat I have to that is that uh, I think it can be very hard to let's how to phrase this in a succinct manner. But um, I think as a person who creates a lot of stuff, it's very hard to really have, I think, a genuine appreciation for that, even as the person creating it yourself. Insofar as, let's say, most people who write books, we don't think about books like this very often because books are very easy to create in the sense that, not that they're easy to write, but that you don't need a lot of resources to write a book, and books aren't considered constrained in the sense that we don't look at books and think of them as incomplete movies or something along those lines. But let's say we lived in a world where it was common for everybody to just kind of have this box next to their bed that you put your hand in it or something, or maybe there's like a diode on it that you attach to your head, and then it can record what you're seeing and hearing in your head, right, when you imagine things. And turn it into movies. Basically, you just put that diode on the side of your head, and you activate the box, and then you start imagining things, and it becomes movie files on your computer. I would imagine if we had that tech, that if you were to give that to everybody who's writing a book today, then a lot of them would end up making movies instead. And in that particular environment, the necessity to write your thoughts down would immediately be considered just a sort of an artifact of the time. That's something you did because we couldn't record thoughts directly. We would consider books outdated. I think that's my theory, anyways. We would consider books an outdated way of communicating at that point, because there's obviously greater fidelity and transparency to your thoughts if you could record them directly and then zap them into movie files or into other people's brains. And I think at that point, almost everybody writing a book would immediately feel like, actually, maybe I should just use this recording box instead, and because that's a more faithful representation of what I'm seeing when I'm writing. But at the same time, there might be some merit in this quote unquote lower fidelity way of sort of recording your thoughts, right? There might be some merit inherent to writing, inherent to books, even though it's less clear, even though it doesn't really convey people's feelings and thoughts as well as if you could record it into an apparatus and zap it into somebody else's brain. And that part of it is lost, and that's what I mean myself as well when I compose things, that as I get better VSTs or whatever, or access to better sound libraries, and as I get better at composing, there's always going to be a sense that that this thing that I made 10 years ago wasn't quote unquote fully realized. But this is true for all art all the time, anyways. Everything, all art that you create is imperfect, and it will never be perfect. And at some point, you have to just abandon it and go, "Well, I'm done with it now," and you put it out there. And I think it's very hard to actually, even as the creator himself, even if you're George Lucas or Tolkien, if Tolkien was still alive today and he decided that actually he wasn't entirely satisfied with Lord of the Rings, so he's going to rewrite it a couple of times and change things around. I don't know that that's like interesting, but I don't know that it becomes better, or in certain respects it could be, but I think that's almost arbitrary or random. Like, yeah, it becomes better for some people, it becomes worse for other people. It's very seldom you have a clear-cut case. Examples brought up earlier, I think when you have something that's kind of shitty in the first place, that most people just look at it and go, that's kind of trash, right? Then you could probably safely do that thing, and almost nobody will care. But for almost any work of art that has some kind of following, that some people are passionate about or love, it will never be a matter of tweaking it to be better. It will always just be a matter of like kind of shifting the shit around. Okay, I tweaked this thing. Now Mr. A over here likes it more, but Mr. B likes it less. And okay, tweak it again. Okay, now Mr. A likes it more, and now Mr. B likes it less. That's why I don't find that kind of conversation or perspective very compelling, if that makes sense. Like, I can see that there's like I'm not saying that it's not valid or that I don't understand where it's coming from. I'm just saying that for me personally, it becomes less and less interesting as time goes by, because at that point, why can't people just make new things, and we can all just kind of move on and just engage with other stuff.
No, I think your point. Oh, sorry, Mike.
I just wanted to add to that real quick that I think you were very clear in your original communication. I think the reason I jumped to sort of a more extreme example with like the fact that I would be thrilled with Vagrant Story playing very, very differently is because even if you get like way more granular or small on the adjustments you're making, it's hard to say what would be considered, like Hian was just saying, an improvement to one person, but a detriment to another. Even when you get really minuscule with it. And so that's kind of the point I was trying to make earlier about the fact that it may be impossible to do a faithful remake in a way that really captures, what was special about the original, because even little things that you adjust. I mean, for instance, I think Hian and I both were very impressed by a recent mod that was done for Final Fantasy VII, or is in the process of being done, where they have these really excellent, chibi models and, that I think are faithful to the original concept art or something. But then we have somebody else in the server who might think, I'm not a fan of those colors. I would adjust them this way. They need to be like, you're just not going to be able to land on what's going to, when you have so many different people, I mean, millions of people that played this original work or read this original work or watched it or whatever, that it's almost like this thing in a way doesn't belong to the author anymore. I'm not even really a death of the author guy, but in a certain sense, it's very true that like now this thing is in the minds of millions of people who all have this different sort of like take on it in their head. And so even if I, the original creator, go back and try to like tweak something, I mean, this is perfectly, obvious in George Lucas's re-releases of the Star Wars trilogy, in the late 90s, right before the sequel, the prequel trilogy came
Prequels.
out. There are tons of people who like saw those new little additions or changes that are, they don't want that at all. It's like, no, just give me like the original again. Why can't I just get the original freaking movie on DVD? Why do I have to have this enhanced or special edition or whatever? Um, of course, there's nobody who knows better than George Lucas what he would have been trying to achieve in the original that he might have felt he couldn't do. And now he has this new tool and he's like, sweet, now I can make it the way I originally wanted to make it. And everybody else goes, that's bullshit. That sucks.
Yeah.
Give me the original one. So it's really hard, I think, to pick out even something as small as let's reword this tutorial or let's improve this or that thing, even if it seems small. You're going to have person B who thinks, yeah, this is not, I liked that quirk about the original thing. Like, let's say, let's improve the snowboarding minigame. I think this is a great example because Hian really likes the snowboarding minigame of Final Fantasy X, and I don't. I freaking hate it. So if you fix that to where it feels, maybe comparable to like a really excellent snowboarding game, I don't know, like something that's
tricky.
Yeah, like all of a sudden I'm going, okay, sweet, I can actually freaking play this game now and like have any hope of not crashing into the wall 15 times. And Hian goes, but the quirk of of the original had a certain charm to it that you lose when this thing is actually technically good and controls well, right? And so one person feels like you've lost that, and so as well intentioned and even as faithful or authentic as you can get as being the original creator revisiting this to try and tweak it and fix it, that thing has already left you and gone out into the public and been enjoyed by people, and it's kind of theirs now. And anything that you try to fix is going to be probably not received well by a lot of people. That's kind of really the only point I was trying to make, because again, person A, as far as Vagrant Story goes, I'm going to be like, sweet, I don't have to like go through 17 menus to kill this one enemy in this room anymore. Awesome. I like this game better now. But then you have someone say like Chocolate Rob from my community, who is just an absolute, mega fan of Vagrant Story, who I'm not sure if he even likes the Souls games, but he would probably see that as a massive betrayal of what made Vagrant Story gameplay special. So it's really hard to revisit it, period, I feel like.
So I think it's interesting to frame what you just said in kind of like, how should I put this? It's kind of like a ship, let's say. A ship, it has like a limited space, it has a specific design that might not accommodate every passenger in the way that they would see it as optimal, but the quality of that ship is enough to get people to buy tickets to take a trip on that ship anywhere they want. So there's this like baseline for what defines the original work in a way that, you touched on this on your last podcast, Mike, it's how social media provides us these bubbles in a way that you notice that different fans of the thing that you are a fan of like that thing for completely different reasons. So everybody has different values and they are all leveled under the same boat, if that makes sense, that they like that source material because of all that, how that design, that whole structure works the way it does, even if there are parts of it that one might like and the other does not. There are certain things there that define that experience to them. So there is this saying in like some media critique circles, as a response to how people say that, if you're to pedantic and super analytical about things. You'll take enjoyment out of other people's experiences. But when they say that a person's nitpick is another person's universe. It's a whole world to another person. Every person has a different value, and this idea of a nitpick can be a world to another can be the same thing on the opposite end. Like a thing that somebody doesn't care too much might mean the world to them, like your example with the Vagrant story gameplay design. So I fully see your point, and I guess that's probably the biggest risk factor behind revisiting the past, right? Because every revisit that you make, even in your own life, I guess, when you are revisiting memories or you are bringing back something, you are always, in a way, bringing a different light to that thing. Like I'm not sure if I look into a same moment in my life with the same feeling. I guess even if they might feel
Of course.
similar, they're not exactly the same. You are experiencing the same thing, but in a different aspect. So it's natural that you are going to change every time you are revisiting a work of art, or in any way, shape, or form that you are doing something in your life. So I get that, but I guess this is why I think my fundamental philosophy of revisiting the past that I think would be good is preserving the general structure and the things that define that work, and expanding on it responsibly. When I say expanding responsibly, I mean things like, not changing the gameplay design, like in the sense of, taking your extreme example, Mike, with Vagrant Story, or, changing the story radically, with a bunch of remakes that are out there. I'm thinking more along the lines of what Link's Awakening does, which is preserve everything that the original work had, but reframe that in a way that it might look new at first glance, but it's when you look into the context of it, you start to see that, oh, it's new, but it's framing it in a way that the original vision was trying to convey with that perspective back then. I don't know if that makes the most sense, but kind of like,
No, it
do
does
not
totally. Yeah.
do not take, for example, this is why I wouldn't take like Star Wars, like you were talking about George Lucas's original trilogy re-releases. 100%, I'm in the camp as well that I'm not that big of a fan of that release, mainly because the things that are already well established and people consider it great, and there is this very strong normative respect behind it, like, sorry, not respect, normative performance that is recognized as something grandiose in the grand scheme of things. There is really no reason to revisit it. The ones that are worth are the ones that, you can preserve the design ideas and limitations that it had. Even like with the snowboarding minigame that you gave an example, like, I would try, if I were to remake that, I would try to keep it janky, like in a way that still preserves that spirit, but also provide like kind of like a bridge between that jankiness with something that is more controllable. Like you can see maybe the forests, like the draw distance is better, but there are still the way that the trees are designed in the overworld makes reaction time still a bit cheesy in certain aspects. So I guess it's trying to take something that wasn't that great to most people, and you bring it in a new light, in a way that you can still maintain that cheesiness, but you are heightening it in terms of the overall picture. I think that's the only way I see that makes remakes worthwhile.
I think I have two caveats to both Hylian and Mike here with in regards to two different statements. One, the whole kind of when an author releases something, it becomes sort of public property almost in a sense. I guess I would say that I think it's worth taking a step back and kind of divorcing, let's say, a person's appreciation of something from a conversation about sort of whose, let's say, right it is to either alter it or expect something not to be altered. Where I would say that ultimately, for example, me writing what I'm writing now and knowing that you, Mike, are writing a novel as well, like, at the end of the day, it's our work, our labor, so we can do with it as we please. And I think it's the same thing with George Lucas. It's completely his right and his prerogative to mess around with his work as much as he wants and alter it over and over again. And people just kind of have to accept that. But I think it's a two-way street where the author then also has to accept if people go, oh, I don't want that. And then you just have to go your separate ways, and you have to be like, well, it's my story. I'll do whatever I want with it, and you guys can go play somewhere else. But then, of course, you can't also then, as an author, be surprised or feel hurt if the response of the public is, well, okay, then we won't play with your stuff anymore. We don't like it. So there's just kind of mutual thing here where I think the work belongs to the author, but the response belongs to the audience. Right, and the audience has a right to say, I don't want to play with that anymore. The same way the author has a right to say, well, I don't want to make it that way anymore. So I think that's one thing. And on that note, when it comes to the value of revisits or reminiscing and stuff like that, I think, World War II history books aren't written for people who fought in World War II, because they don't need the history book because they were there. Right. If you were on the beaches of Normandy, you don't need to read somebody's account of being on the beach of Normandy. The accounts of being on the beach of Normandy is written for the people who weren't there. And I think you can think about remakes and remasters the same way. The remakes and remasters are for people who weren't there in '97 to play Final Fantasy VII. Because if they were there in '97 and played Final Fantasy VII, then they don't really need to replay it again, right? You can if you want to, but you don't need to. You already know what it's like. And I think that in that sense, I am empathetic to your review, Hylian. That if we look at remakes and remasters the same way that we look at history books, the idea is to allow people who weren't there in '97 to experience some approximation of what we experienced in '97. There's this, on one hand, I would hope that people just went and played the original game, to be honest, but sort of, because unlike going to the beach in Normandy, like I can't jump on a plane and go to Normandy and shoot people, so like, I wouldn't want to even if I could, but I can't do that. So, like, it's nice to have, like, a book or a movie, right? Like, I can watch Saving Private Ryan. I don't need to, put on my leather boots and my helmet and bring my old machine gun, right, and relive that. But when it comes to video games and movies and books, they are the way they were when they were released. So you can experience Final Fantasy VII for the first time, if you've never played it before, and play the same game that I played, at least up until a certain extent, right? If you don't have a CRT monitor, or, if you've already been exposed to other games that are more sort of impressive in terms of fidelity or production values, obviously you're getting a different experience. But so you can't experience it the same way that I did. But the fact of the matter is that it's not like every person in '97 experienced the game the same way either. There are plenty of people who played Final Fantasy VII in '97 and thought it was pardon my French again, dog shit game. I had friends who thought Final Fantasy VII was terrible in '97. I had friends who thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. So ultimately, I would just like people to play the original. But I can understand if we're talking preservation of history the same way that we talk about the writing of history books for new generations, then obviously it's fine to have like remakes and remasters, because they're not for the people who were there. They're for other people. But then, of course, your perspective about staying true to essentially what happened, if we think about it in terms of history, it becomes kind of important. Because if you make a remake that's nothing like the original game, you're not really preserving history. You're distorting history.
Exactly.
You're giving people you're it's like writing a history book where the Nazis won at the beaches of Normandy. That's not what happened. And I think that's an argument that you can make about something like Final Fantasy VII Remake. Of course, the optimist or sort of remake fans will just say something along the lines of, well, you can always go and play the original game. But like, realistically speaking, if we're looking at people in the age bracket of 14 to 18 or whatever, seeing Final Fantasy, the remake trilogy for the first time, like, how many of them are really going to go back and play the original? A lot of them are just going to play the remake trilogy, and in their mind, that is what Final Fantasy VII is at that point. End of story. There's that's the official account of things. You've just twisted history. The Nazis won at the beaches of Normandy, and I can see how that's like frustrating. Wholly separate from a conversation about being obsessed with the past or whatever. Just it's upsetting in the general sense that I think many people at least, have kind of an inbuilt desire for accuracy when it comes to things. It's kind of just like if you had a conversation with your friend about going to Disneyland last year or something, and his account of that doesn't match your memories, you're gonna feel a bit like annoyed, right? Your brain's gonna go like, you're wrong. That's not what we were doing. We didn't have hamburgers. We ate sushi or whatever. What's wrong with you? Your memories are out of whack. And I think that's what you're creating when you do that. So you get this weird cultural clusterfuck of people with completely disparate appreciations of a thing, of history, essentially. And it's going to be a source of tension and frustration, whether people want to or not, because I just think that's very normal. You don't like it when people say things that sound like they're completely out of whack with your appreciation of reality. So,
yeah, I think this is why this type of work, when it goes off the rails, it tends to be it tends to bring very strong feelings from people. I think this natural response that you just described is the crux of it, because at the end of the day, the people who experienced the original, they want that to be preserved to the future, and if that experience is not properly or faithfully communicated to the new generation, it becomes like a sort of deletion of your history in a certain way. The things that made it special become buried over time, and you see less and less people realizing what made that thing so great. I think one of the biggest dangers, I would say, like behind this remake culture is precisely that. You have people who are so hooked into this hype culture, especially now with social media, where the big media thing that we are consuming right now is like the thing that we need to hype the most to feel included in a conversation. This is something that we need to be up to date, and this kind of trend is what incites people to not revisit the original like when they are getting to know this thing. So this is why with Final Fantasy VII Remake, not a lot of people are going to, by impetus, checking out the original game first. I know some people do that. I don't want to generalize. I know that this exists. But the truth is that most people want to feel included in the conversations that are taking place in their social media bubbles, and they will gravitate, obviously, towards the new interpretation. And the worst aspect behind this is that if the new interpretation, if this new version brings an interpretation that is at odds with the original, or maybe provides an experience that is not as great as the original, you as a fan of what came before, you become a bit disheartened, because you're like, man, a lot of people are not getting why that thing was great, and a lot of people are getting introduced to this IP, and they're being pushed away not because of the original ideas, but because this new guy is reinterpreting in a way that doesn't really make sense with the original, and he is not executing that new vision well either. So it's kind of frustrating. Like, it's this with remakes, it's this with adaptations. Like, somebody can take like, I don't know, the like the animated adaptation of the Adventures of Tintin or the Super Mario Brothers movie, and they might watch that film and they might think that they know what those properties are, but they really don't. And if you know what the source material is, you're in this frustrating position where a lot of people are not going to listen to you when you're trying to point them to a direction where you're like, hey, check this thing out, the original first. And if they don't check the original first and they are dissatisfied, they're going to reply, why am I going to check out the original first if this new thing already disheartened me, right? So I guess this is the cultural the cultural problem behind the remakes, I would say. So I don't want to extend this too much. I know that I think it's getting a bit late there for you, Mike. I don't know how long you can stay. So if you feel like you need to go, you can always tell, okay?
Yeah, I probably need to get going because it's like 3 a.m. here.
Yeah.
So if there's anything else that you would like me to kind of comment on, maybe we can hit on that real quick.
Okay, so I know you talked about you briefly talked about, like, if you think that this trend is going to last, if you think it's good or bad for art, and whether revisiting the past is a good or a bad thing. What I didn't hear from you, and I think was the next point that I wanted to go in, is what do you think? Why do you think that this trend is so strong right now? Like, why in particular is this like, why is this trend happening now and not before? Because we had audiovisual history taking place for a very long time. There were already a lot of opportunities for corporations, for artists to capitalize on remakes and remasters, etc. So why now? What makes this trend so special, and where do you think this trend began, in your opinion?
Well, if we're just talking about the gaming industry, it makes a lot of sense that it's happening now because it was a brand new thing when we were young. There wasn't like enough of a pool of classics to even remake, though they were happening. I mean, like, you go from the NES to the Super Nintendo, they have Super Mario All Stars, kind of bringing the first three Mario games into, like, with more colors and looking more like a Super Nintendo game. But a lot of the companies that were kind of like, they were upstarts, they were artists who were passionate about this new craft, and really small teams and small companies who were the pioneers of this industry. So they create something that blows up, becomes super successful. A lot of people love it. And I mean, of course, the first thing that's going to happen are, people with money are going to step in and try to corporatize, make it a publicly traded company, like, capitalize on this, let's make this into a franchise. Let's like, that's just kind of the way it goes. And you're not going to get anything like revolutionary or innovative from giant corporations that are more or less trying to protect a status quo. That just kind of becomes the mindset after a certain point of time. And so somebody else outside of that realm will have to step in and do something that's like truly innovative or different or cool and start a new trend, which then all of the corporations then try to follow and then just like milk that as much as they can until that becomes boring. And then somebody else who, again, is not part of that world and can actually take risks comes back in again. So I think the reason we're seeing this in games to the extent that we're seeing it, well, I think even in Hollywood too, with at least with blockbuster movies kind of all being superhero, adjacent or related or whatever. And you're seeing the fatigue coming from that too, and that's why you're starting to see a lot of those slow down and start to not be received well. But you're seeing the death of a trend there, right? Like superhero movies kind of started with, I would say, Spider-Man and Iron Man, and they saw the potential of like how big that could be, and then all of a sudden, Disney buys Marvel. And they start just like producing the living shit out of a million of these, and they become totally homogenized, and they're playing it super safe and protecting a status quo that they have a formula that they feel can make money, and then people start getting real tired of it. And I mean, you're really seeing that now, and I think that's why you're seeing not nearly the same level of excitement, but also the same rate of production. They're being more careful with them now. A lot of these movies are bombing. They're losing money now, and so you're not going to see that continue. That trend is dying at this point. And I think the same thing will happen with this remake and remaster trend. I think there will come a point where people just get tired of this. It's like, why can't we have something new? Because like I said earlier, there are certain, AAA development studios they're basically declaring, we're just going to focus on sequels and remakes now. That's how you make money. But that's not going to be the case if that's all the industry's doing for the next 5 or 6 years. Like, you have to have games coming out that people feel are new and fresh and are not just retreading existing franchises or existing games over and over again. So there's going to come a point at which this trend will die as well. But I think the reason that it exists is totally because of corporate interest and takeover of this industry.
So why did the corporations think now is the best time to do this? Because these corporations were already cultural empires, and they had a lot of control in mainstream media and public perception on a lot of things. And the blockbuster as we know it was already established with the Disney properties, with their animated films, and then with Star Wars in the 1970s. Why didn't this blow up, for example, in the 1980s or 90s? Why did it have to blow up now in the 2010s? Like, is there maybe like a cultural space, like a cultural context in the world right now that maybe lends the companies an idea of, it's safer, it's better to bet on this than ever before, because they already own those properties, right? So what stopped them from doing that before?
I don't think I don't think there's an equivalence here between sort of what the market looks like today and what it looks like before, because almost all of the properties that we're seeing all these remakes from are connected to legacy nerd media. And the fact is that legacy nerd media did not have the same consumer basis and install basis back in the 80s that they do today. So there wouldn't have been any value in remaking, what would you have remade in the 80s or the 90s that would have had that? Like, see, you talk about the Disney remakes, right? But Disney were already franchising at that point in the 90s and early 2000s, right? They just weren't making remakes per se. They were making Aladdin 2 and Aladdin 3 and whatever. But I don't see a huge distinction there, because I don't think Aladdin 2 and 3 are much less like creatively bankrupt necessarily than some of the remakes that they've put out, because they're very low effort kind of boorish entries into the lore of Aladdin, if you will. but at the same time, also, like, they probably didn't have. What would an Aladdin remake of Aladdin look like 5 years after Aladdin released, or 10 years after Aladdin released? It's not like the tech had improved that much in the interim either. So I think
I'm not thinking about something like Aladdin. I'm thinking about something more like the older films, like Snow White, like Cinderella, like
well,
Fantasia.
sure. But I think I think those got remasters for both for DVD and yeah, but
Yeah,
like
VHS, yeah.
yeah, but again, like, the point is, it's not like the tech has changed that radically at that point for sort of a remake of that to make sense, because you could still show the original and it would be presentable on TV and people would like, this is sufficient, right? But again, like, we're in a particular time and space right now with the internet and the advent of like social acceptance of nerd media, and everybody's nerd now, everybody's on Twitch, everybody's playing video games, everybody's connected to this in some way, one way or the other. Everybody knows what I don't know, like, I'm not going to say that everybody knows what Warhammer is. I'm sure that's we're getting shout out to Anvil, but yeah, but we're almost there, right? We're almost there where you can actually, you can read, you can be probably a junior high school student and have read Lord of the Rings and not be bullied for it. We've finally gotten there. And I think that is why it's lucrative, because if somebody had made Lord of the Rings, let's say, and they're I think they're already talking about remaking Lord of the Rings. So Jesus Christ, please don't.
Are you
But
kidding?
yeah, but yeah, but I'm not kidding.
Wow. Okay.
But that's the thing, right? Let's say Lord of the Rings had been a movie that they made in the '80s, like kind of Willow style. You better sort of. It wouldn't have made sense to remake that like '80s Lord of the Rings, or if let's say there was a '70s Lord of the Rings, and then remaking that in the '80s, because like the gap from the '70s to the '80s isn't large enough for that, and you still wouldn't have necessarily a large enough fan base to justify it. But when suddenly you now have a culture where, because of the internet, you have virtually a billion nerds just sitting there, and they all think Lord of the Rings is the best thing ever. It makes immediate sense why you just remake Lord of the Rings.
It's all about the amount of money that is at stake now versus then. I know what you're getting at with your question is this maybe something that our generation is more attached to our past than, say, our parents were. And to be honest, I can't answer. I don't know.
Based on my parents' watching habits, I don't think that's true at all, because my parents still sit on Netflix and watch like old Steven Seagal movies and shit like that.
Yeah, and my parents love watching all these and stuff. They very much kind of stick to the things that, during their formative years, that the same music that they loved then and stuff like that.
Sure.
So I don't think psychologically there's much difference in what's causing this. I think it's 100% about the amount of money that can be made. I think it's astronomically more as the world has become more connected, as distribution has become easier and cheaper, and there's just a market that has, just population in general. Like, what is the population of the world today versus 1960 something? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's just way more people and way more money to be made, and way larger pools of fan bases to, I'll use the word exploit. It's well, this is justified then, these out of control budgets to produce these things. The rate of production today is much higher and faster, and it's just all ramped up to this kind of insane degree to even make such a thing possible.
It's hyper entertainment.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm gonna coin hyper entertainment.
Well, I asked this question mainly because I wanted to. I have my own opinion on that. I think a lot of what you said, both of you, Mike and Hian, hit the nail on the head there. And I also asked this because there is this talking point from some people. I do not share necessarily this view, but that this remake culture is also stemming from a certain creative kind of like a drought in a sense. Like there are a lot of artists that are in positions of power in the mainstream that are kind of running out of fuel, and in order to keep themselves afloat and try to move forward in the industry, they prefer to appeal more to remakes as a sort of a reminder of their own artistic roots, and try to make the new generation learn from that creative process to create new things in the future. Do you sorry, do you think that this makes sense, or no? You think that that is totally detached? It's just a corporate interest that's driving that, or do you think that there is a cultural, a creative, quote unquote, drought that is also fueling this?
You want to go first on that, Hian?
I can. I'll try to keep it short, knowing that you're on the time. But
Yeah, this is the last question, I swear.
yeah, I think it's so hard to what's the word, quantify, right? Sort of I don't know if there's a creative drought, because I think there's more art and media produced now than ever, or just in pure numbers. And so obviously it's going to be very hard to have sort of a bird's eye view of that and ascertain to what extent are we producing more creative art as opposed to more derivative art. And I think it really depends on genre, location, a lot of different factors that just makes that question almost impossible to have a sort of. It's not a question that you should probably have too firm of an opinion of. Having said that, I do think that there are creative droughts in places, because I think the way that our world has become, and this might be somewhat of a stretchy argument. I know some people probably won't intuitively accept it, but I think we live in a world where, due to sort of improved living conditions in life, obviously, and the advent of the internet and computers playing such a large part of our life and our workforce and so forth, the automation of different professions, etc., has put us in this position where I think a lot of people don't really live life as much as they used to. And their lives have become very kind of sterile, I think the word I'm looking for. And I don't think a sterile life is something that produces good art. I think you have to be out there and live and communicate with people and experience things, get traumatized, right? Yes. Hellish as that sounds, but you kind of have to be out there falling off of trees and bumping into wild animals and seeing sort of the sad and depressive sides of society as well as the good ones. And you have to be rich with life experiences to produce good art. I don't think you produce as good art if all you're doing is sitting in your bedroom consuming other people's art. Obviously, novels and movies and video games can be interesting windows into the soul and life experiences of the artists that made them, but it's not a replacement for experiencing things of your own, because obviously in experiencing things on your own, you also evolve as a person and become better at thinking on your own, critically and leaning into your life experiences and so forth. And so if there is a creative drought, I think obviously a lot of it just has to do, as Mike said earlier, with the state of the industry, where you're just not incentivized to be creative, and in many ways, in many companies, you're not even allowed to be as creative as probably you would like or you would hope. But also, it's like you suggest, if you have a young generation of creatives who are kind of born and raised on Twitter and YouTube and Twitch, and sitting in their house during pandemic lockdowns and what have you, and who are socially awkward and they don't go out and do things and do the things that humans used to do for most of their evolutionary history. I don't know that they're going to be able to express things that are, using a term I don't like very much, but that are soulful, that are full of soul, I suppose, in a literal sense, right?
Yeah.
They're full of the essence of their life experiences. And I don't, again, I think it's a bit spurious to presume that that is true for most of the people who produce things that some might look at and go, that's creatively bankrupt or what have you. But it's certainly possible. And I think it's worth bearing in mind, especially if you're an aspiring artist yourself, if you're a person who wants to write stories or make video games, that maybe you need to make an effort to challenge not just what you're trying to in what you're trying to create, but challenge yourself just in your everyday life and how you're living your life, and sort of feeding some of that fire of yours into the life that you're leading, so that you can bring some alchemic power from that back home and channel it into your art. And if you're not doing that, you're basically just copying copies of other people's copies, and you keep doing that for long enough, what you're left with is like a blank paper, right? There's no ink on it. So that's my theory, anyways.
Yeah, I'll kind of dovetail off of that and say that you can learn a lot about style from studying other artists, but there is no replacement for your own life experience, what you actually know about and can say something about. So when it comes to the creative bankruptcy you're talking about, it's because the decisions being made are not being made by a human being with human experiences that feel passionate about these things. They're being made by corporate machines who base every decision off of surveys and feedback and tests with this or that, audience and this or that market, and compiling all of that data into some kind of meta-analysis that makes them go, oh, the trend right now is this. And so we can feel safe that if we follow this trend and we incorporate this particular thing, that we will make, such and such return on investment. Like this is devoid of the necessary ingredients you need to create art. It's not art at all. It's just simply business. And so there is no circumstance I can see in which a film studio, an author, an artist, a game studio, whatever, becomes corporatized, where in any way, shape, or form their work becomes better, more soulful, more profound, more innovative. It never happens. It always becomes about, okay, here's a standard, here's a status quo, this is what we expect to happen, this is what our shareholders expect to happen. So we must protect that at all costs. And the only way I'm putting their money and our money into that project is if I can feel certain it will give this return. And what the data tells me is that you need to have open world with this or that RPG element in it, and this or that character archetype that this market likes, and it's just completely devoid of any human like experiential decision making. There's no process of that in there. And now I say that in a general sense. Obviously, there are going to be some larger companies that do a better job, that maybe the executives are less meddlesome in the process, that let their artists have more freedom to develop. Of course, there are examples of that, and there are AAA video games that are very, very good. But I think on the whole, when you're examining the entire industry, you are seeing it trend in a direction where the vast majority of what it produces is vapid, forgettable drivel, or just mediocre, time-wasting fun, and not something that moves the needle in any way of informing or changing our culture. And that has become more and more true over the last, I want to say, 10 to 15 years. Like, with each year, it becomes more that way. Now, you're still going to get a Baldur's Gate 3 every year. You're still going to get, something really excellent from that space, maybe even 3 or 4. But how many games are you actually getting from that space in a year? Like, what percentage are those 3 or 4 really representing of actually truly being excellent? Whereas you go into the indie space and you see all kinds of stuff that it's like, well, I've never seen someone try that before. That's a really interesting idea. Wow. We just played Outer Wilds on our podcast a couple months ago. I've never freaking played something like that before. Like, never. It's like, wow, this is like a new video game that I've never seen before. This is insane. Now, it's not to say there's not been space sims or obviously they would have taken inspiration from other things, but it felt so fresh because their particular method behind why and how they developed that was informed by passionate human choices. And there's no overhead. There's no meddlesome corporate executive who has no freaking idea why this stuff matters to us making decisions. I think that is in and of itself like the explanation for why we're at where we're at.
Wow, that's phenomenal. I want to give the closing thoughts then here. I want to first thank you all for coming. I'm more than honored to have both of you here. Hian, you're such a big contributor to my community for a long time, and I've been wanting to do this with you for a while. And Mike, you've been you have a legendary history, and I've been wanting to actually talk to you about art and so many things for an extremely long time, and I can't be happier today than being here with you. So thank you for being here and giving your insight. So yeah, I want to thank everyone here. Do you guys have any closing thoughts? You can obviously show your content, and if you also want, I know it's kind of funny to ask this at the end, but if you want to list as well any remake, remaster, reimagining, or requel that you're looking forward to, if any at all, you are free to do so.
Well, I'll just say thank you for the compliments. I certainly would downplay a little bit myself. I certainly would not consider myself legendary or anything near it, but I do love I do love these kinds of conversations. I do love discussing it and sort of working through some of my own thoughts, and so this format is one I really enjoy, and I appreciate you putting this together. I always love talking to Hian, of course, and it was very, very awesome to get to meet you finally. I know we've been, kind of missing each other or back and forth for years at this point. So it was nice to actually finally, talk to you. And this is a super valuable conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm going to chip in and say thank you both for your time and the conversation. It was great. I don't know to what extent I contributed to it, but hopefully I said something that wasn't completely far-fetched and asinine. I try to make roughly 5% of what I say, sort of, let's say, not entirely insane. That's kind of what I'm aiming for. I don't really have anything to shill, so I'm not going to do that. As for remakes and requels and remasters that I'm looking forward to, I actually sat down thinking about that yesterday before this conversation, and I could not for the life of me think of anything, except if it counts, I am currently watching the new adaptation of Shogun. That's I don't know where it's airing or whatever, because I sail the seven seas, so I'm watching it through illegitimate means. But I suppose that's a remake, kind of, right? It's an adaptation of a book, but it's been made into a TV show before, which I've also watched, and I am very much enjoying it. It's not perfect. It goes back to what we said earlier. Shifting things around where it's better in certain respects than the previous iteration of that show, and it's kind of worse in others. So you take some, you lose some. But at least I'm enjoying it. So I guess I'm looking forward to the next episode of Shogun.
Nice.
I am also looking forward to getting that started, and I also have really liked the new Dune films. I haven't seen the second one yet, but I'm going to go see that probably over the weekend here, so I'm excited to see that.
Me too, actually.
That is true.
I am not familiar with the book nor the film that exists, so I'm going to be a very conscious consumer, and I'll try to consume to experience the book and the film before I watch the remake in theaters. So I'm gonna do my best with that. I want to thank you all. I'm honored to hear your thoughts and your appreciation. I think this kind of conversation is extremely important to have. I think we need to sometimes take a breather and reflect on our current state in art and try to find the good and the bad and see how we can grow from this. And hopefully in the future, I would love to have you guys in future episodes as well when you guys can. At least on my end, know that you guys are more than welcome. Okay.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. It was great talk, and we'll have to do it again at some point.
Of course. And to all the viewers watching, thank you all for tuning in, be it live, be it on demand. This video will be uploaded in full. If there are any audio issues in the live stream, I will correct them and upload it on my main channel. And I'll share the links to everyone if necessary. If anyone wants to check out Hian and Mike, there are links to their channel, or in Twitter's case, their accounts there as well. To give them a follow, give them a subscribe. They're wonderful and creative people. As you can probably tell from this podcast, they have great artistic insight. So go support them. And more than anything, thank you all for giving us your time, and maybe you learned something from this conversation. So I bid you all farewell. Have a good one.